fleece jacket for protection. Imagine snow heaped like white, frozen waves against the bark walls, the surrounding forest groaning under the immense weight of ice, and the river frozen stiff as solid glass. You instinctively pull your shoulders tighter against the penetrating chill, because this is the world of the Longhouse. It's a wooden ribcage of a structure, a building where dozens upon dozens of people huddle close, somehow managing to not turn into frozen statues by dawn. So, just before you get truly comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy the atmosphere we create here. And if you do, post your location and your local time in the comments below. I truly love seeing who is still awake out there with me. Now, dim the lights. You trudge through the deep snow toward the Longhouse, and the very first thing that hits you is the sheer bulk of it. These are not cozy, individual cabins. They stretch out like massive ships run aground, 60 or even 100 feet in length. The Iroquois Confederacy alone constructed some so vast, you would be forced to wonder whether they were meant for humans or for giants. Wooden poles rise up like the ribs of a great beast, bent inward and securely lashed together, then clad in heavy, overlapping slabs of elm bark. Snow presses hard against those bark panels. You can hear them creak and snap under the strain, but the walls hold. That is the first miracle of this place. No matter how much snow dumps overnight, you are safely inside something that won't just collapse and bury you alive. The second miracle is the faint, warm glow that leaks through small cracks near the roof. Inside, fires flicker in the center aisle, small, smoky, but blessedly steady. Without them, this entire place would be nothing more than a frozen tomb. Archaeologists concur that longhouses utilize central hearths lined up in a long row, with each hearth belonging to a pair of families. A mainstream fact is that among the Haudenosaunee, several nuclear families would form what they called a clan. That clan claimed a specific stretch of hearth and bunks within that shared longhouse. The fire, you see, is both literal and symbolic. It is keeping you physically warm, and it is tying you into a network of relatives who will absolutely notice if you stop breathing in the night. Now, here's a quirky tidbit for you. Snow itself sometimes became part of the insulation. When storms raged, the families inside didn't scrape it away. Instead, they let the drifts pile high against the outside walls, acting like nature's own blanket. It sounds completely counterintuitive. You think snow equals cold. But snow is mostly just air trapped within ice crystals. That trapped dead air layer clings to the bark and significantly slows the brutal, cutting wind. If you ever built a snow fort as a kid, you already know it can feel surprisingly snug inside. So, in a way, the very storm that terrified you on the path over is now actively helping to keep the longhouse cozy. Still, historians sharply dispute just how cozy it really was. Some researchers suggest the temperature inside merely hovered just above freezing, barely enough to stop frostbite from claiming fingers and toes. Others claim that with so many bodies packed in, the fires constantly stoked, and hides layered thick, the interior could feel genuinely warm. Perhaps even too hot for comfort. People might have stripped off their heavy outer furs to nap in just their shirts of soft skin. Scholars still argue, were longhouses drafty, cold barns, or were they surprisingly efficient heaters? You will probably never get a precise thermometer reading, only accounts filtered through human memory, archaeology, and the lingering smell of charred wood. Your nose wrinkles at that smell right now. Smoke fills the air, thick enough that you cough and instinctively rub your eyes. Longhouses were not ventilated like your modern house. They had smoke holes positioned above each hearth, simple little vents in the roof. But whether they drew well depended entirely on the wind. Sometimes the whole place filled like a giant pipe, and people had to lie low, breathing near the floor just to avoid the stinging in their eyes. You might wonder, wouldn't that much smoke suffocate you overnight? And yet, paradoxically, that smoke is part of what saves you. The thick haze kills fleas and lice, it deters mice, and it even keeps some disease vectors at bay. It also effectively dries the meat and hides hung overhead. So yes, your lungs burn a bit, but without that haze, you might wake up far itchier, hungrier, and ultimately colder. The soundscape of the longhouse adds to your strange sense of comfort. Beyond the thin bark walls, you hear wolves howling in the distant forest. But inside, it's the rhythm of snores, the sudden pop of sap in the firewood, the faint, deep creak of timbers expanding and contracting in the cold. Children murmur in their dreams. Elders clear their throats. And sometimes, someone laughs softly at a story being told just before bed. All of these noises blend together into a lullaby of survival. You are not alone. You are part of a human furnace. You run your hand along the inner wall. The bark is rough, splintered, yet it's warmer than you expect. Behind it, lie bundles of reeds or moss, jammed tightly into the seams to block the worst drafts. It is not perfect. You can still feel a thin whisper of icy air snake in. But compared to the world outside, this is heaven. The whole structure seems to breathe with its occupants, sighing out smoke, drawing in just enough fresh oxygen to keep you alive. And when you finally lie down, stretching out on a raised wooden bunk lined with woven mats, you realize the simple genius of it. You are off the frozen ground. You are tucked beneath a heavy layer of hides, with other bodies pressed nearby. You are wrapped in a bubble of shared human determination. Outside, the snow pounds the bark like drums. Inside, the bark holds. That is how you sleep. Not in the comfort that you know, but in a rough, smoky and miraculous warmth, carved directly out of the frozen forest. The hearth fires are flickering low in the darkness, painting the longhouse interior in moving stripes of orange and deep shadow. You rub your arms against the chill, noticing the way each individual flame licks at the logs like a hungry, living tongue. It is steady, yet fragile. Without these small, persistent fires, everyone here would be completely lost to the cold before morning arrived. The longhouse doesn't rely on one single, massive fireplace. Instead, it's a series of hearths, spaced carefully down the center aisle, each one claimed by a family. If you step too close, you feel the heat flare intensely on your skin. Step back just a few feet, and you are in the chill once more. They are like islands of warmth, strung precariously along a frozen river. A mainstream fact is that these hearths served a double duty: cooking and heating. Archaeologists consistently find long rows of blackened soil in old village sites, the distinct traces of these fireplaces. Here, food and survival were utterly inseparable from warmth. A pot of corn soup bubbling quietly over the embers gave off both vital nourishment and plumes of steam. These are the two things your body craves most when the night claws at you with its icy fingers. You don't just eat the warmth, you breathe it in. The quirky part comes when you inevitably look upward. That smoke doesn't just vanish, it has to go somewhere. The longhouses had smoke holes cut directly into the bark roof. It was a practical solution that was never, ever perfect. You can see faint beams of starlight stabbing down precisely where the vent lets the smoke out, and inconveniently lets snow swirl in. Families had to manage those holes with constant care, sometimes adjusting bark slabs or even plugging gaps when the storms grew wild. Imagine being assigned smoke hole duty, your nightly chore, to poke a long stick at a flapping bark flap far above your head. It's not exactly glamorous work, but without it, everyone inside might well choke in their sleep. And this is where historians disagree. Some suggest these smoke vents actually worked surprisingly well, creating a natural draft that pulled air up and out, much like a chimney. Others insist on the exact opposite, that longhouses were often filled with a haze so thick you could hardly see the rafters above. One researcher even speculated that children and elders must have suffered from constant coughs due to smoky lungs. Scholars remain divided over whether longhouse life was bearably smoky or nearly unlivable. You lean back and cough quietly into your sleeve, wondering which version feels more true tonight. Still, the smoke adds a sensory layer you simply cannot ignore. The air is heavy, yet it's oddly soothing, almost like incense in a vast cathedral. It settles onto your skin, it clings to your hair, and it slowly stains your clothes until you carry that scent everywhere. And maybe that is the point. Your personal smell becomes inseparable from your shelter. It's like a badge of belonging. Strangers approaching the village could be identified by scent alone: longhouse smoke, or the clean, sharp bite of winter air. Listen closely. You'll notice the fires talk to you. Each crackle, each soft hiss, is a tiny reassurance that the wood still burns. The embers glow like watchful eyes, watching over the sleepers curled nearby. People learn to read those sounds instinctively. A sharp pop means sap exploding. A soft crumble means the log is hollowing out. The fire is alive, and you, in turn, are alive because of it. One little detail, quirky but intensely practical, is how carefully families rationed their fuel. You can picture yourself dragging in heavy armloads of firewood before nightfall, stacking it like a treasure hoard near your hearth. Running out of wood midwinter wasn't just inconvenient, it was deadly. Some oral traditions recall people burning bark, stripped from living trees, or even dismantling abandoned structures when the supplies ran fatally short. You can almost hear the quiet groan of someone rising in the dark to add just one more stick to the flames, muttering about how stingy the wood pile looks. Your skin feels it now, warm on the side facing the fire, chill on the other. The fires in the Longhouses were not roaring bonfires. They were modest, controlled blazes, too large, and they would send sparks flying into the dry bark walls or woven mats, with catastrophic results. Too small, and the insidious cold would creep back in, stiffening fingers and toes. Finding that perfect balance was a nightly act of judgment. Now, imagine lying down. The fire is burning low. Smoke is rising lazily toward the roof. Your eyes are half closed as you watch the sparks float upward like fireflies. You know you are safe not because the fire eliminates the cold, but because it tames it, just enough for your body to finally rest. Beyond the walls, the winter rages. Inside, the hearth burns on. Stubborn as you ease yourself onto one of the sleeping platforms, and the difference is immediate. These raised bunks run along both sides of the long house, simple wooden planks braced directly into the walls. Their height is a clever, simple trick to escape the cold grip of the frozen ground. You notice instantly that the lowest air, down by the floor, always feels the coldest. It's a fact modern campers know well. Cold sinks, warmth rises. By climbing onto these platforms, you are physically lifting yourself into the gentler, warmer layer of air where the heat from the hearths lingers. A mainstream fact stands here, plain as the plank beneath you. Longhouses typically featured 2 or even 3 tiers of sleeping shelves, stacked like giant bunk beds. Families with status, or perhaps the elders, often claimed the middle height, a coveted position, neither too near the icy floor nor too close to the thick smoke drifting beneath the roof. Everyone knew their place, not just socially, but spatially, clearly marked out along these long timber ledges. And here's a quirky detail. The bedding wasn't what you'd expect. Some mats were woven from bulrush or cattail, plants pulled from the marshes in autumn and dried until they made a surprisingly springy bedding. Imagine lying on a mattress made of pondweeds. It's not luxurious by your standards, but once it was softened with a layer of animal hides, it gave just enough cushion to keep hips from bruising on the hard boards. In fact, some early European travelers reported that these beds were surprisingly comfortable, wonderfully springy, warm, and sometimes even fragrant with the sweet grass that was occasionally mixed in. Your hand brushes the wall behind you, right where bundles of reeds and moss have been stuffed into every seam. Cold still whispers through the tiniest cracks, but this layered construction makes your raised corner feel almost snug. Families added more layers on top of the mats, furs of deer, beaver, sometimes even heavy bear pelts, until you could sink into them like you were inside a cocoon. You tuck yourself under one of these hides now, and the musty smell of the skins, permanently mixed with wood smoke, becomes oddly and profoundly soothing. Historians still puzzle over just how effective these raised bunks truly were. Some argue they were absolutely essential, keeping sleepers dry and significantly warmer than the floor. Others point out that with dozens of people crowded together, the rising body heat alone might have done most of the work, and the bunk height itself mattered less. Still, archaeological digs consistently uncover wear marks on those high platforms, telling us that people did indeed climb up nightly. This proves the design wasn't just for storage, it was a core part of the sleeping strategy. Above your head, the rafters hold evidence of this. They are heavy with baskets, bundles of dried fish, and strings of corn, all dangling in the air where the smoke can preserve them. That arrangement means you are half sleeping inside a pantry, lulled by the faint, dry rattle of kernels shifting in their husks. If you're hungry, the smell of drying meat torments you, but it also reassures you this longhouse has food enough to last the cold months. The air carries a quiet chorus, the creak of wood, the soft sighs of kin settling into place, the muffled bark of a dog somewhere outside. You press your ear against the fur blanket and realize just how insulated you truly are. The raised bunk isolates you from the frozen ground. The woven mats soften the wood, the heavy hides trap your heat, and the bodies all around you radiate their own warmth, like living coals. Still, nothing here resembles the privacy you are used to. You share this shelf with siblings, cousins, maybe a grandmother who is snoring steadily right by your ear. Privacy was a luxury that nobody here considered essential. Survival was the shared blanket. It was the common breath. It was the collective heat. You might grumble at an elbow jabbing your ribs, but you would rather that than the alternative, waking up frozen stiff on the floor. As you drift towards sleep, you feel a deep gratitude for the raised platform beneath you. These are simple boards that separate life from death. Outside, the ground could freeze a spilled bucket of water solid. Inside, this bunk holds you just high enough to stay human through the long night. You shift slightly on your platform, and suddenly you feel the distinct weight of bodies pressing in close. The longhouse was never a place of sprawling personal space. It was a human quilt. You tuck yourself nearer, shoulder against shoulder, hip against hip, and you realize how intensely practical this was. One reliable observation from anthropologists is that these communal sleeping arrangements were not just about companionship, they were essential insulation. In the deep of winter, every breath you exhaled and every beat of your heart became another layer of heat for the person sleeping beside you. You might imagine penguins huddling in the Antarctic, constantly trading spots on the icy edge. The principle here was much the same, though the people were wrapped in bark walls and fur blankets rather than feathers. If you've ever camped with friends and found that a tent of 3 people warms up much faster than a tent of 1, you already understand the trick. Now, multiply that effect by 20 or 30 sleepers, and you begin to understand how a long house, as smoky and crowded as it was, created its own functioning microclimate. Some early European visitors remarked on how stifling the atmosphere could get, so much so that you might be forced to strip off a layer or two, despite the snowstorm howling just outside. That wasn't comfort in the modern sense. But survival didn't require comfort. It just required warmth. Here's a curious aside. Some sources recall that couples often slept pressed tight under a single hide, with children wedged in along their flanks. The warmth of intimacy wasn't simply emotional, it was thermal engineering. Infants and toddlers rarely, if ever, lay alone. They were tucked securely between parents or grandparents, their small forms protected by a fortress of flesh against the cold. In fact, travelers sometimes expressed shock at the lack of what they considered proper spacing. But to the families within these walls, distance meant danger. A baby separated by even a few inches might lose crucial body heat before dawn. And yet, scholars differ when they try to reconstruct how close these sleeping arrangements really were. Some argue the platforms were divided into distinct family compartments, with hides strung up like curtains to grant a little privacy. Others suggest that privacy was largely, if not entirely, abandoned in favor of mass survival. Conflicting reports survive, leaving modern researchers to puzzle over how people managed to balance the desperate need for warmth with the innate desire for personal space. You can almost picture the bickering even now. One person begging for just a little elbow room, another snapping back that elbow room doesn't keep your toes from freezing. The scent of humanity is thick in here. Sweat, smoke, and the faint, musky note of animal hide. It is not sterile, but it is oddly grounding. You breathe it in, and you recognize that this is the smell of endurance. Without deodorant, showers, or ventilation, the air becomes its own body, heavy, but undeniably alive. In a strange way, that smell tells you that you are still among the living. This close contact also shaped social bonds. You didn't just hear your cousin's stories by the firelight, you felt their breath stir the fur on your cheek as you both drifted into dreams. Arguments couldn't last long when you were forced to roll over into the same shared blanket by nightfall. Secrets were thin things here. The whole household knew who cried in their sleep, who muttered prayers, and who kicked restlessly through the night. In that sense, the Longhouse was as much a crucible for community as it was a defense against the frost. Imagine the sounds, the slow, collective breathing of the group, a baby's soft whimper, the shuffle and rustle of someone adjusting their hides, a cough rattling from a far corner. Each sound bounces off the bark walls and reed mats until it becomes part of a nightly symphony, and that constant noise reassures you. Silence. Silence would mean something is terribly wrong. There's an offbeat detail that travelers noted. Sometimes, families trained their dogs to leap onto the sleeping platforms too. The dogs curled against ankles or sprawled at the edges, serving as extra bundles of living heat. Their fur collected embers of warmth from the fire, and their mere presence reassured children who were frightened by the howling wind outside. You feel a cold nose nudge at your toes right now, and instead of annoyance, you sigh in relief. This little creature is a heating stone wrapped in fur, and it belongs as much to the Longhouse as the timbers themselves. Not everyone found comfort in this closeness. Some accounts describe outbreaks of quarrels sparked by sheer crowding arguments over who hogged more of the hides, who coughed too loudly, or whose feet strayed into another's ribs. But even through all the bickering, people returned night after night to the exact same tight quarters. Discomfort was tolerated because the alternative was unthinkable. It was better to endure a sibling's snores than to endure the frozen, silent indifference of the forest. The truth is that every inch of this closeness reflects adaptation. Modern readers like you might cringe at the lack of privacy, but survival fundamentally rearranges your priorities. You have to wonder what you would trade: the tidy solitude of your own room, or the steady, reliable warmth of 10 human furnaces pressed all around you. As your body relaxes into this shared cocoon, you realize the answer has already been made for you. The snow outside may rage, but in here, humanity itself becomes a blanket thicker than any fur. So you close your eyes, wedged securely between kin, shoulder to shoulder, and you understand. Survival in the Longhouse was never an individual accomplishment. It was a group performance. It was a nightly collaboration. It was a communal heartbeat that kept the winter at bay. You stir awake in the darkness, shifting under the oppressive, heavy weight of hides. The Longhouse is never truly silent. Embers snap and pop. A baby fusses softly. Somewhere nearby, a dog shakes its fur, sending a little shiver down the wooden planks. You tug the coverings higher over your shoulders, pulling them close, and you think about what these blankets truly are. They are not cloth, they are not feather duvets, they are animal skins. Layer upon layer of deer, elk, beaver, and even immense bear hides, all stacked thick against the unrelenting cold. One detail that historians consistently emphasize is the sheer, total reliance on pelts. Long before Europeans arrived bearing woven cloth and wool, the people here had already perfected the art of using animal skins for insulation. These skins weren't just simple coverings. They were multi-purpose survival tools: shelters, floor mats, coats, and of course blankets. The warmth currently seeping into your bones is thanks to the very animals that once roamed these same frozen forests. What's truly striking, though, is how these hides were utilized beyond mere blankets. Families stretched them taut against the inner walls to stop drafts. They hung them as heavy partitions for a semblance of privacy. They draped them across doorways to serve as thick, insulating flaps. You can almost see someone in the dim light, tacking up an extra bear hide over a seam where the wind whistled through relentlessly. Practicality defined the aesthetic. Every visible surface was layered with fur until the entire interior looked like the inside of a giant, smoky pelt shop. And here's a curious tidbit you might not expect. Certain furs were prized as much for how they felt as for their simple warmth. Beaver pelts, for instance, were known to be soft and supple, making them ideal for wrapping children. Bear hides, far heavier and muskier, were seen as protective, even powerful. Some oral traditions strongly suggest that sleeping beneath a bear's pelt carried a kind of spiritual strength, as though the animal's profound endurance rubbed off on you while you slept. Picture a child, cocooned in fur, being told by a grandparent that the bear's spirit would keep the nightmares away. In this world, the blanket was both insulation and talisman. But not everyone agrees on how widespread certain pelts really were. Scholars examining burial goods and ancient trade records continue to debate whether bear hides, for instance, were common bedding or if they were reserved for special individuals. Some argue that the sheer bulk and relative scarcity of bear skins made them impractical for everyday use. Others point to repeated references in oral accounts that suggest they were indeed nightly companions in many, many households. The truth may never be fully settled, but the image lingers. Families enveloped in the layered, primal strength of the creatures they hunted. You run your hand over one of these hides now. You feel its complex textures, the rough outer hair, the much smoother under fur, and the faint, ever-present oiliness that never quite washes out. The smell is earthy, a potent reminder of the wilderness that has been pressed into service inside your home. The hides creak as you shift them. They are heavy enough to feel like another body lying on top of you. And blankets weren't the only way animal parts contributed to warmth. Tan skins sometimes doubled as floor mats, insulating the bunks from the cold drafts that swept along the planks. Hides strung between poles could form makeshift barriers, turning one big communal hall into segmented alcoves where smaller groups could sleep. Even the stretched stomach linings from larger animals were occasionally used as translucent panels, blocking the wind while letting in just a little filtered light. Ingenuity here had no waste. Imagine the nightly routine. Hides are shaken out, rearranged, tucked securely around the children. Someone fusses to make sure a flap covers their exposed toes. Another person pulls a heavy pelt over the entire group, as though sealing in warm coals. Once settled, the blankets don't just warm you, they pin you, forcing you into stillness. Perhaps that is part of why sleep came so swiftly. Once you were under the heavy hides, moving was simply too much trouble. Dogs nose around, curling up on the edges of the blankets, where heat inevitably leaks. They bury themselves, partly under the skins, accepted guests in this layered fortress. Their presence adds to the sense that these furs represent more than just fabric. They are a living continuity, a link between animal, human, and the spirit world of survival. There's something oddly modern in this, too. You might think of the weighted blankets that people use today for comfort and anxiety relief. Those ancient piles of hides offered the exact same heaviness, pressing you firmly into calm. No one in the longhouse would have called it therapy, but the effect would have been deeply familiar, a dense, embracing weight that quieted your body. Yet, you cannot ignore the challenges. Hides grew stiff with age, sometimes cracking if not properly oiled. They absorbed smoke and sweat until their smell turned rank. Bugs nested in the fur unless the smoke from the fire drove them off. Maintenance was constant, scraping, softening, replacing. Families worked as much to keep their blankets functional as they did to keep them warm. Still, the hides outlasted countless winters. And as you breathe in their scent now, you realize they embody the entire survival strategy. To take what the land gives, to stretch its gifts across walls, doors, and beds, until the winter is finally caged outside. Without these animals, the longhouse would be nothing but a wooden skeleton against the snow. With them, it becomes a living, breathing den, warm enough that you, too, might just drift off to sleep. Despite the blizzard raging outside, you lie awake, staring into the dark, curving shadows of the longhouse wall. The fire's glow has dwindled, leaving only a faint shimmer of embers, and in this quiet, you begin to notice how much thought went into these walls themselves. They aren't simply bark slapped onto poles. Their layers are stuffed, packed, and tended with meticulous precision. You run your hand along the inner surface and feel how uneven it is. Bark slabs are overlapping, their seams pressed tight. And here and there, you feel the scratchy softness of reeds or moss that has been jammed forcefully into the cracks. Archaeological surveys and surviving accounts all agree on one steady fact. The outer bark covering was not enough by itself. Cold wind would slice through any gap, and rain or snow would creep in. To fight that, Families lined the seams with plant matter. Cattail fluff was a favorite, gathered in the autumn and stored for exactly this purpose. Dried moss or bulrushes worked too. Stuffed deep into the cracks, they created countless little air pockets, nature's own insulation. Modern scientists point out that this layering acts much like the fiberglass batting in today's houses. The principle is identical. Trap air, slow heat loss, and keep the inside just a little more bearable. And yet, here is an unusual detail that makes you smile. Cattail fluff wasn't only insulation, it was also tinder. People could scrape just a little bit of it loose, and it would catch fire instantly with the tiniest spark. Imagine the paradox. Your walls are lined with material that both saves you from freezing and could set the whole place ablaze if you weren't careful. This is survival engineering at its absolute riskiest. A family might patch a drafty seam in the afternoon, then, hours later, scrape that very same seam for a quick fire-starting puff. You can almost hear someone muttering, "Just don't mix up which pile is for stuffing and which is for lighting." Experts don't always agree on how effective this wall packing really was. Some argue that a long house, even when fully insulated, never rose above chilly temperatures. Think sweater weather rather than cozy warmth. Others suggest that once every seam was stuffed and the fires were properly maintained, the interior could hold heat remarkably well, sometimes too well, creating an oppressive, smoky stuffiness. Reconstructions built in the modern era have shown both possibilities. Some leak like sieves, others trap warmth until you sweat. The debate lingers, leaving you to wonder what version you're experiencing tonight as you press your palm against the rough bark. Still, your own senses confirm the benefit. Where the moss is stuffed thick, the wall feels almost soft, like a padded surface. The air near it is still, completely without the icy draft that snakes through gaps left bare. You remember walking past newer structures outside simple lean-tos or single-family huts and realizing how much more the wind cut through them compared to this. The longhouse is a fortress. It's not perfect, not cozy, but it is far superior when the snow stacks high. Imagine the seasonal rhythm that made this possible. Families spent the autumn harvesting reeds and cattails, drying them carefully, bundling them in great heaps. Children likely joined in, stuffing the light, fluffy material into sacks or baskets. Those same children now crawl along the walls in winter, poking tufts into holes while their elders direct them. Survival was never just adult work. It was a household performance. Every hand, small or large, had to contribute. The smell of the stuffing adds another sensory layer. Moss holds a damp, earthy aroma, faintly sweet and forest-like. Reeds, once dried, give off a grassy scent. In the smoky chamber, these smells mingle until the entire house carries the perfume of wetlands mixed with wood smoke. Close your eyes, and it's like the whole environment is pressed indoors. Swamp, forest and river, all brought together to guard your sleep. Of course, maintenance was constant. Winds tugged bark loose. Rodents chewed at the stuffing. Rain and snow dampened the seams. A daily routine might involve someone circling the interior, finger-testing the cracks, jamming more moss where the cold breathed through. It is not glamorous work, but it's what kept children from shivering too hard at night. A little oddity turns up in some oral accounts. Families sometimes smeared mud or clay into the cracks for extra sealing. This hardened into crusts, acting almost like primitive caulking. Clay blocked the wind well, though it also crumbled with time and needed replacement. Some modern reconstructions that have tried this discovered it not only worked, but it also lent the house slightly different acoustics. The walls muffled sounds, so that the interior felt quieter, hushed under its earthy skin. You can picture villagers sitting back and noticing the muffled storm outside, their voices swallowed into warmth by the very mud they had plastered. Looking upward, you see how the roof, too, benefited from layers. Overlapping bark shingles, sometimes weighed down by poles, shed snow like scales. Any gap left open could be stuffed from the inside. You trace one of those seams with your eyes, watching faint moonlight filter through, and you think of the endless hours spent weaving nature into something greater than itself. And though the debate continues about how effective all this stuffing truly was, one thing is certain: without it, the long house would have been a leaky, miserable barn. With it, even in the harshest storms, families could breathe, sleep, and live without turning to stone. You lean back, brushing your hand over the moss-packed seam again, and realize you are touching the very line between survival and surrender. The wind outside roars, the bark creaks, but within these stuffed seams, the air stays calmer, the warmth lingers longer, and you, wedged under hides and surrounded by kin, can finally exhale without seeing your breath freeze in front of your face. The night stretches on, and your attention slowly drifts toward the longhouse entrance. In the daylight, it looks simple enough, just a low, oval opening cut into the bark walls, covered by a hanging flap of woven mat or animal hide. But at night, in the coldest hours, that flap becomes the very gate between life and death. The longhouse is only as warm as its weakest seam, and the doorway is always the first suspect. One thing that early observers consistently noticed is how these entrances were deliberately engineered to function like cold traps. They weren't tall or wide, like a modern door. Instead, they sat low to the ground, forcing you to duck and stoop every single time you entered. That wasn't clumsy design, it was practical physics. Cold air sinks and rushes through gaps at ground level. A small, narrow entrance minimized this flow, and the heavy flap of fur or bark mat added one more crucial barrier. Step through quickly, drop the flap, and the house's fragile pocket of warmth stayed intact. And there's an offbeat little note here. Some households hung multiple layers of coverings, like heavy curtains in succession. You would have to push through a thick fur hide, then another dense mat, then finally emerge inside. Travelers wrote about feeling like they were squeezing through a beast's throat, only to be spat out from the bitter cold into the smoky warmth. You can easily imagine the awkward shuffle of guests wrestling their way past those clinging mats while someone inside shouted, "Close it quick! You're letting the heat out!" Some things never change. Now, not every scholar agrees on how standard these multiple flaps were. Archaeological remains of door frames are exceptionally rare, and the oral accounts vary. Some researchers argue that most longhouses had only a single mat per door. Others believe that 2 or even 3 layers were common, especially in the harsher northern climates. Without conclusive evidence, the debate lingers. The truth may depend on the region, the season, or even the wealth of the specific household. Still, the mental picture of these layered portals persists: primitive airlocks that protected the precious warmth within. You crouch at the doorway now, brushing your hand against the flap. It is thick, heavy with smoke residue, and stiff with frost along its edges. Push it aside just an inch, and you feel the icy draft instantly sharp, invasive, a brutal reminder of what waits outside. Close it again, and the longhouse seems to exhale with relief, like a body pulling its blanket back into place. Inside, the flap isn't just insulation, it's also a threshold of etiquette. Visitors announce themselves with a call before entering, then duck low, in respect as much as in necessity. Children are constantly reminded not to linger in the opening. Every second it gapes open is a second the entire family shivers. The doorway becomes a constant test of discipline. Shut it, secure it, respect the heat your kin worked so hard to build. There is a powerful sensory layer to it too. Each time the flap lifts, a swirl of senses trades places. Outside air sweeps in, crisp and metallic, full of snow and pine. Inside, air rushes out, heavy with smoke, stew, and fur. For a single heartbeat, the two worlds collide, and then the flap falls shut, restoring the fragile separation. You notice how sharply your skin reacts. Goosebumps at the icy kiss, then a thawing warmth once the barrier closes again. Dogs often curl up right beside the entrance. They are half guard and half draft stopper. Their bodies physically plug the gaps at the bottom, and their sharp ears alert the sleepers to anyone arriving late. The flap brushes their fur when it swings, and they grunt, annoyed, before settling back down. Even the animals seem to understand. That door is a weak spot, a place that must be watched. Maintenance, of course, never ends. The flap stiffens with ice. It tears in storms. It frays with constant handling. Families patch it with new hides, layer mats over the weak spots, or hang even heavier pelts in midwinter. Some accounts recall that moose hides were prized for this duty, as they were thick enough to block even the bitterest wind. Imagine tugging aside a curtain of moose hide, dense, musky, almost a wall in itself, then feeling the shock of the blizzard as you slip past. And here's one more curious side note. Entrances weren't always at the ends of the structure. While many reconstructions place them at both ends of the longhouse, some evidence suggests side doors, especially for emergency situations. These could act as quick exits if a fire broke out, a very real hazard with all that smoke and tinder. Scholars continue to debate whether these side doors were common or rare, but the possibility lingers, like a half-seen seam in the archaeological record. As you sit near the doorway, you sense the house's fragility most acutely. All the moss-stuffed seams, all the raised bunks, all the blankets of hide. None of it matters if the flap is left open too long. Warmth, after all, is not permanent. It must be defended, constantly. One draft, one crack, one careless child at a time. You lean back, watching how the flap moves with the storm outside. It sways slightly, never quite still, like the lungs of the longhouse itself. Open, close, breathe in, breathe out. And in that simple rhythm, you see the genius. A simple piece of fur or mat, transformed into a hinge between two worlds, icy death beyond and smoky survival within. The wind claws at the flap, but it holds. And so do you, pressing closer to the firelight, comforted by the thought that this flimsy-looking curtain is, in fact, one of the strongest shields you will ever know. The hours creep forward, and your gaze finds itself drifting upward, toward the dark, arching roofline. You focus on the smoke holes. These small, absolutely crucial vents become the silent arbiters of life inside this wooden belly. They are simple openings, cut between the overlapping slabs of bark, and they are adjusted with long poles from below. Sometimes they are widened to clear the air, sometimes narrowed to trap the heat, all depending on the shifting moods of the night. You might expect them to be tidy, efficient chimneys. They are not. They are fickle, shifting mouths that can both protect and betray the people huddled beneath them. Historical descriptions are crystal clear on one thing. Without these smoke holes, the longhouses would have been utterly unlivable. Fires smouldered all day and all night, and that thick, acrid air had to escape somewhere. There were at least 2 vents lined up with each hearth, forming a kind of primitive exhaust system. But unlike modern chimneys, they were not sealed channels. They were simple, imperfect gaps that had to be fussed over constantly. If the wind pressed from the wrong direction, smoke would pour downward. If snow clogged the opening, families coughed through the night until someone brave climbed up to scrape it clear. An amusing oddity surfaces in some accounts. Children were sometimes tasked with vent duty. Imagine a sleepy 1-2-year-old being prodded awake, handed a pole to poke at the bark flaps far above, trying to coax the smoke outward while simultaneously keeping the snow from cascading in. One early European visitor even joked that every longhouse was a school of smoke management, where children learned quickly or suffered the immediate sting in their eyes. You can almost hear a groggy voice muttering, "Just 5 more minutes," while the smoke thickens like a heavy wool blanket over the bunks. But modern scholars don't all agree on how well these vents actually worked. Some argue the draft effect was surprisingly efficient, pulling air up through the center aisle like a functional chimney system. Others contend the interior was perpetually hazy, with visibility shrinking the higher you looked toward the roof. Reconstructions built in modern times have, in fact, produced both results. In some, the roof clears the smoke beautifully. In others, the ceiling turns into an impenetrable cloud chamber. Which version was most typical remains unsettled, leaving us to imagine a wide spectrum of experiences, from breathable warmth to choking haze. Sitting here, you feel the evidence firsthand. The smoke drifts in slow, lazy ribbons toward the roof, eddying like ghosts against the dark bark. Some of it escapes into the night, but much of it lingers, tinting the air with a permanent, smoky dusk. Your eyes water slightly, your throat prickles, and yet, in that discomfort, you also notice how strangely protective the smoke is. Insects that might otherwise thrive in this crowded, warm space are subdued. Meat and fish hung from the rafters high above your head dry steadily as the smoke wards off rot. Even the hides stay more supple in this constant haze. The discomfort clearly has its benefits, and everyone here has learned to live with stinging eyes for the sake of long-term safety. The smell, of course, clings to everything. Your clothes, your hair, even the walls themselves soak in the smoke until the longhouse develops its own olfactory identity. Outsiders would notice it instantly. That acrid perfume of hearth smoke and bark oil, impossible to wash away. It is the scent of belonging. When you step outside in the morning, the clean air feels too thin, almost alien, and you find yourself longing for the smoky womb again. The sounds of the vents provide another sensory layer. In a heavy wind, they whistle faintly, a high, thin note above the chorus of crackling fires. When snow slips through, it patters on the hides or mats below, the cold droplets hissing as they strike hot embers. These tiny intrusions are constant reminders that the roof is not a solid wall. It is a living membrane, breathing with the storm. Sometimes, people deliberately manipulated these vents to balance heat and air. If you push them wide, the smoke flows out, but the precious warmth follows. If you close them too tight, the room swelters with a choking haze, but it traps that heat. Families argued, no doubt, about which was worse: smoke in your lungs or frost in your bones. Perhaps the decision shifted night to night, or even hour to hour, depending on the wind and the state of the fire. Imagine lying there, hearing voices rise in the dimness. Open it wider. No, you'll freeze us. Then stop feeding the fire so much. The vent becomes less a chimney than a mediator of household quarrels. There is one striking observation from archaeologists. The rafters of excavated longhouse sites often carry thick, caked layers of soot. Charred residue clings to the wood, proof that the smoke lingered year after year. In some sites, these soot layers measure inches thick, like black rings of time. Each winter added another coat, darkening the timbers until the very bones of the house became smoke themselves. You can imagine looking up right now, seeing rafters stained as though they had been dipped in ink, holding decades of fire within their very fibers. And then there is the symbolic role. Among some nations, the smoke rising through those holes was thought to carry prayers skyward. The vent wasn't only a physical necessity, it was a channel linking the earth to the spirit world. Breath, fire, and story, all of it drifted upward, meeting the stars through that one tiny gap. It is humbling to think that what you experience as coughs and watery eyes was, for others, a sacred connection. So you lie back, watching the smoke coil toward the distant stars, wondering how many lifetimes have passed under these very same plumes. The vent lets in the snow. It leaks precious warmth. It irritates your lungs. Yet, it also lets the people inside endure. It is imperfection, accepted and transformed into survival. The storm outside groans. Snow hammers the roof, and still, the smoke finds its way out. You breathe shallowly, half in discomfort, half in gratitude. The vent may not be perfect, but it is enough. You stretch your legs out under the heavy hides, and something immediately brushes against your feet. It is soft, warm, and startlingly alive. You jolt for just a moment before realizing what it is: a dog, curling itself into the small crook of your ankles. You remember that the longhouse isn't just filled with humans. It has other sleepers too. Dogs lived here just as much as the families did. They padded between the bunks, wagged their tails hopefully near the fires, and then, at night, settled in the best place of all, pressed right against a human body. One thing that emerges again and again in early descriptions is how indispensable these animals were. Not just as hunting companions and guards, but as vital heat sources. In these crowded, frigid winter nights, every single scrap of warmth mattered. A dog nestled against your legs became an extra, living layer of insulation, a breathing, fur-covered ember. If you've ever camped with a dog in a tent on a cold night, you know exactly how effective that warmth can be. The people of the Longhouse knew it well, and they welcomed the animals directly into their sleeping arrangements. There's an amusing glimpse from travelers who noted that dogs sometimes stole the prime spots near the fire. They would sprawl so close, their fur actually singed, forcing children to nudge them back with sticks. Yet, no one truly banished them. They were far too valuable, too deeply woven into the household's rhythm. Their barking warned of threats, their presence deterred pests, and their heat was a nightly gift. You can easily picture someone grumbling, "That dog takes up more room than I do," even as they pull the animal closer when the wind howls outside. Researchers continue to discuss how central dogs truly were in daily longhouse life. Some argue they were primarily working animals, let inside only occasionally. Others point to archaeological finds of careful dog burials, suggesting they were kin in their own right, fully integrated into the family's routines. The exact balance between pet, tool, and fellow sleeper is still debated, but tonight you feel the answer pressed warmly and reassuringly against your toes. The sensory details are undeniable. The dog's fur is coarse on top, yet softer beneath. It's faintly oily, carrying the wild smell of the outdoors. Each exhale carries a puff of animal breath, musky, but oddly comforting. The sheer weight of its body pins your feet in place, grounding you with a physical reminder that survival here is never solitary. Even the animals play their part in this nightly battle against the cold. Sometimes, stories say, dogs curled not just at the feet, but across entire bodies. A child might sleep half buried beneath a pile of 2 or 3 dogs, wrapped in both fur hide and fur flesh. You can imagine the muffled giggles of children as warm paws kneaded their blankets, followed by the collective sigh of surrender as everyone drifted back to sleep. The line between pet and blanket blurred completely. Of course, there were drawbacks. Fleas and lice traveled just as easily on dogs as on humans, and the crowded environment amplified the problem. Some families countered this with herbal washes or even smoke baths, holding the animals over smoldering herbs to cleanse their coats. The image might make you chuckle, a squirming, unhappy dog enduring a smoky spa treatment in the middle of a winter night, but it reflects a constant truth. Even your furry heaters needed maintenance. There is also a deeper, symbolic thread. Among several native nations, dogs carried important spiritual roles as guardians of the afterlife or as intermediaries in ritual. To sleep with a dog was not only practical, but spiritually resonant. Its presence shielded you from more than just frost. It was believed to keep away darker, less tangible threats. When a child snuggled against a dog, the protection was twofold: warmth and ward. The longhouse atmosphere shifts subtly because of them. Their occasional low growl or whine interrupts the steady rhythm of human breathing, reminding you that this house shelters more than just people. Their paws scratch faintly at the wood, their tails thump in dreams, their ears prick at sounds outside. You are never truly unguarded with dogs at your feet. Think of the sharp contrast. Outside, wolves prowl in the deep snow, their howls piercing the night. Inside, their smaller cousins lie at your side, loyal, tamed, and transformed into allies. The wilderness presses hard against the walls, but here in this smoky cocoon, its sharpest teeth are dulled by fur, warmth, and companionship. You shift slightly, and the dog sighs, curling even tighter. Its body radiates a steady heat, better than any stone warmed by the fire. For a fleeting moment, you feel a kinship that exists beyond words. Survival, you realize, isn't just human determination. It is interspecies cooperation. It is a pact of warmth. The storm still rattles the bark outside, but under these hides and fur, with a dog curled across your feet, you feel something more than just safety. You feel continuity. Humans and animals, sharing the same fire, the same smoke, the same collective dream of lasting through the night. And in that realization, your body relaxes again, soothed not only by the heat, but by the quiet heartbeat thudding gently against your toes. The storm outside refuses to rest. Wind claws at the bark walls, and snow hisses as it slides down the long roof, rattling the poles and tugging relentlessly at the seams. Inside, you feel the breach immediately, as drafts snake across your cheek, thin and cold as ghostly fingers. Everyone stirs. No one can ignore it when winter muscles its way in. It is time for repairs. These are the constant, urgent adjustments that keep the longhouse alive, especially when midwinter tries its absolute best to tear it apart. Archaeologists point out one steady, undeniable truth. Longhouses were not static. They were in a state of near-constant upkeep. Bark panels loosened in the storms. Bundles of reeds slumped. Woven mats wore thin. Families were always patching, stuffing, and reinforcing. This work didn't pause because the season was harsh. It intensified precisely because it was harsh. You can picture someone shaking off their heavy furs, grabbing a bundle of cattail stalks, and wedging them forcefully into a seam that had just started to whistle with the cold. Survival wasn't just a passive, nightly ritual of huddling. It was a continuous construction project. And here's a vivid little aside. Some reports describe entire families climbing onto the roof during brief lulls in the winter storms, stomping the snow into place deliberately. Rather than clearing it away, they packed it down, turning it into extra insulation. The roof became a layered cake of bark, poles, and compressed snow, incredibly heavy, but surprisingly effective at keeping in the warmth. You can almost hear the laughter of children sent up to stamp their feet, turning a dangerous blizzard into an impromptu, necessary game. Don't fall through. Someone yells from below, and the children stomp all the harder, leaving the longhouse snugger than it was before. Experts, however, still debate how often such dramatic repairs truly happened during the deep of winter. Some argue that most patching was done before the snow set in, with families retreating into a kind of hibernation once the worst storms began. Others insist that maintenance was constant, even in the heart of January, with people braving icy ladders and rooftops simply because the alternative was freezing to death inside. Archaeological reconstructions give both impressions. Some look sturdier than others. The question lingers, unresolved. You press your palm against the wall now and feel where fresh, new moss has been crammed in, perhaps just hours ago. It's still damp from the marsh where it was gathered, smelling faintly green beneath the thick blanket of smoke. Another seam nearby shows evidence of a quick, rushed fix. Mud smeared along the gap, now hardened into a brittle crust. Whoever patched it must have hurried. Yet even that rough job makes a tangible difference. The draft softens, the air steadies, and you feel a profound gratitude for the hands that worked while you slept. The longhouse interior buzzes with this quiet, constant labor. A man shifts a bark slab back into place, wedging it firmly against a post. A woman knits a new mat from reeds, her fingers swift and sure despite the penetrating cold. Children carry bundles of dried moss, stuffing them where their elders instruct. These tasks are not glamorous, but they are life. And each sound, the creak of poles, the soft tearing of moss, the sharp snap of bark splitting, reminds you that this building is not a passive shelter. It is a living project. It is constantly adjusted. It is always demanding. There is a strange comfort to be found in this work. The act of repair brings people together. It serves to turn raw anxiety into focused action. Instead of lying awake, fretting uselessly about the storm, you share the labor of keeping it out. And in doing so, you also share resilience. Everyone participates. Elders point, children fetch, adults climb or hammer. The longhouse is less a house and more a team effort with walls. Sometimes, those efforts went even further than just patching. Oral accounts mention desperate winter nights when families dragged entire poles inside the structure to brace sagging walls. Picture waking to the awful groan of timbers, then watching as a group heaves a fresh pole against the structure, wedging it like a splint on a broken bone. The house itself limps through the season, held up with these makeshift supports, a testament to raw ingenuity. A curious quirk shows up in some traditions. People believed that certain repairs carried a symbolic weight. Hanging a new hide over a gap wasn't just practical. It might also be an invitation for the animal's spirit to shield the family. Mud daubed in cracks was sometimes blessed with quiet words or gestures, turning it into more than just clay. Whether or not you believe in such rituals, you can sense how much they mattered, how the physical act of fixing also patched emotional and spiritual seams. And of course, there is the endless, anxious juggling of firewood. Repairs don't matter if the flames sputter out. The woodpiles shrink faster than you'd like, and every storm makes the act of gathering more difficult and dangerous. Families often stored logs inside the longhouse itself, stacked neatly along the walls, so that in moments like this, you don't have to face the howling dark outside. You roll over and spot the pile, barkless logs, neatly cut, waiting to be fed to the flames. Their very presence is a deep reassurance, like money in a bank account. The smell of these repairs lingers, the sharp resin from fresh bark, the earthy dampness from the new moss, the metallic tang of wet mud. All these scents mix with the ever-present smoke and fur, forming what can only be described as an aroma of resilience. You inhale deeply and realize this is what endurance smells like. A building patched by countless hands, layer upon layer of human effort holding back the storm. Yet, despite all this effort, you can still hear the wind pry at the edges. You can still feel the faint drafts that inevitably slip through. This house is not sealed like a modern cabin. It is a negotiation. It is a truce, struck nightly between wood and weather. And maybe that is why sleep here feels so different. You are never entirely shielded. You are never entirely safe. But you are never helpless either. You are cocooned in the combined will of your family, your clan, your community, people who choose to repair, again and again, rather than surrender. The storm rages on, but inside, with bark patched, moss stuffed, and fires stoked, you feel the longhouse steady itself, like a great ship riding a massive wave. It may creak, it may leak, but it holds. And so do you, drifting back beneath your hides, trusting in the endless, sacred work of repair that carries everyone through another night. The storm has finally eased to a dull, muffled hush, but inside the longhouse, another rhythm quietly takes over. You hear the soft clatter of bowls. You see the fragrant steam of simmering food. You feel the low, comforting hum of conversation. You open your eyes and realize, in this moment, that warmth here isn't just static bark walls, or packed moss seams, or heavy fur hides. It is also what bubbles and steams in the pot strung just above the fire. It is the communal meals that double as active heaters in the deepest, coldest part of the night. Accounts from missionaries and early travelers highlight one point, again and again. Food and fire were inseparable. The very same hearths that dried hides and warmed bodies were also the kitchens of the longhouse. Stews of corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters of agriculture, were common. Toss in some venison, smoked fish, or wild fowl, and you had a dish that not only filled bellies but also sent billowing waves of steam rolling into the cold air. That rising vapor actively softened the sharp bite of winter, turning the smoky chamber into a fragrant, humid sauna. There is a delightful little detail tucked into some oral traditions. Children often dozed off with warm bowls still clutched in their hands, the broth spilling onto the hides as they slumped against their elders. No one scolded them. This food wasn't just nourishment, it was lullaby fuel. Imagine drifting to sleep with the rich smell of corn soup in your nose, a full stomach pressing pleasantly, and the extra humidity in the air making your breath less brittle. It might not rival your central heating, but for sheer survival, it was genius. Yet, scholars interpret the role of this food heat differently. Some argue that the thermal contribution from cooking was minimal, especially compared to the fires themselves. After all, once the pot cooled, so did the steam. But others suggest that with dozens of pots simmering in longhouses that might shelter 50 or more people, the cumulative effect could be substantial, raising the ambient temperature by several crucial degrees. It remains one of those points still unresolved, leaving us to simply imagine the sensory reality. Bowls steaming, bodies warming, and arguments settling over a shared ladle. You can picture the nightly scene. Pots hang from the crossbeams, their contents bubbling. The soft hiss of boiling broth mingles with the sharp crackle of the fire. Wooden ladles clink against clay or carved bark bowls. Someone coughs. Someone laughs. Someone slurps loudly enough to earn a playful shove from their neighbor. This is a warmth you can taste as much as you can feel. The smell is intoxicating. Sweet corn mingles with smoky venison. Beans release their deep, earthy aroma. Squash adds its mellow, sweet undertone. For a moment, your senses trick you into believing the longhouse is warmer than it really is. The heat from the food and the profound emotional comfort of eating together combine, and your body relaxes, despite the draft still sneaking in through the seams. Sharing food is also sharing heat indirectly. A full belly burns like a small internal furnace. Those calories convert directly into warmth, and your body, in turn, becomes a better radiator for those pressed beside you on the bunks. That is why these meals matter, not just socially, but thermally. A hungry sleeper is a cold sleeper. A well-fed one is a warming presence in the communal quilt. Here's a quirky aside. Some stories mention that families deliberately cooked at odd hours, late into the night, not just during the conventional day. Why? Because the very act of cooking reinvigorated the house. Fires had to be blazed higher. Pots steamed and hissed. Movement stirred everyone from their lethargy. The Longhouse, for a brief time, shook off its icy slumber. A midnight stew wasn't just an indulgence, it was a survival strategy. Of course, it wasn't all comfort. Food scraps attracted pests. In a crowded, warm Longhouse, mice and insects were constant, unwelcome intruders. Dogs snapped at them. Children giggled at the chase. But the elders knew it was a serious battle. The smoke helped deter the worst of it. But vigilance was constant. You can picture someone muttering in frustration as a mouse darts away with a stolen, precious kernel. Both warmth and resources were at risk. Food also served as social glue. Each hearth might belong to two families, but meals often crossed those boundaries. You might find yourself eating from your aunt's pot one night, or trading a piece of venison for a scoop of beans with your neighbors down the aisle. That sharing built more than just nutrition. It built obligation, gratitude, gossip, and in a house where people slept elbow to elbow, those social ties mattered as much as any wall of bark. Debate still lingers over how formalized these meal-sharing patterns were. Some anthropologists argue it was casual and ad hoc. Others see clear evidence of strict etiquette. Who ate first, who served, and who had rights to which particular pot. The reality was likely a spectrum, with different nations, different villages, and different seasons shaping different practices. But for you, right now, the sensation is simple. Steam is rising, hunger is fading. A warmth is spreading from both the inside and the out. As you sip the hot broth, your body loosens, your shoulders drop, your eyelids grow heavy. Heat flows from your stomach to your skin, meeting the radiance of the fire and the heavy press of the hides. You feel doubly shielded, armored in food as much as in fur. And then you realize, survival here isn't a single strategy. It's a whole, interconnected web. Bark walls, moss seams, raised bunks, flaps of hide, dog fur, and now, bowls of hot soup. All of it, working together to keep a thin-skinned primate alive in a winter that should, by all rights, kill you. The storm growls faintly outside again, but inside the Longhouse, the only growl is your stomach. Satisfied now, silenced by stew, you curl tighter beneath the hides, warmed by food, family, and fire, and you finally understand why people here endured not just a single night but whole lifetimes of winters, without freezing. The fires crackle steadily now, their warm glow spilling across the faces of those gathered in a semicircle, their bellies full from the stew. No one is in a hurry to crawl under their hides. Instead, they linger near the warmth, their voices rising and falling in a rhythm that feels just as old as the timbers themselves. You realize this isn't just talk. It is ceremony, it is story, it is ritual. Movement joins the words, hands gesture, and feet stamp gently on the planks. You understand that warmth in the Longhouse isn't only physical, it is also generated by spirit and by motion. This is a recurring observation from early visitors. Longhouses were not silent dormitories. After dark, they transformed into living theatres of memory. Elders recited the origin tales, the clan histories, and the crucial seasonal lessons. The very act of storytelling itself filled the night air with a different kind of energy. You can feel it as you listen now. The familiar cadence of a practiced voice, the sound of children's muffled laughter, the soft rustle of listeners leaning in closer. Even when the fires themselves burned low, these gatherings created a second, potent kind of heat. It was emotional, communal, intangible, but entirely real. A curious little detail emerges from oral accounts. Certain dances were performed indoors during the winter, even within these cramped spaces. Imagine the scene. people rising from their bunks, circling the central aisle, stamping their feet in perfect unison, while drums thudded softly. This movement was not just symbolic, it was intensely practical. It drove circulation, it warded off numb toes, and it generated crucial body heat for everyone pressed around the fire. The ritual, in effect, doubled as exercise, ensuring bodies stayed limber, even while the storm outside begged for total hibernation. Scholars still discuss just how formal these nightly events actually were. Some suggest these ceremonies happened only on very special occasions. Others believe that storytelling and dance were merely nightly habits, woven deeply into the routines of survival. While excavated longhouse sites do reveal fire pits large enough to accommodate such gatherings, whether those flames lit regular performances or just occasional feasts is still debated. But as you sit here, watching the glow on the faces around you, the answer feels obvious. When the winter stretches on, seemingly endless, stories are not luxuries, they are necessities. The sensory landscape of these rituals is incredibly vivid. The thud of the drum beat reverberates against the hard bark walls, a steady pulse that successfully masks the moan of the wind outside. Voices begin to layer over one another, some rising in song, some murmuring in quiet agreement, others interrupting with sharp bursts of laughter. The smoke curls upward, lit by the firelight into swirling, dancing ribbons that seem almost alive. Your skin tingles, not from the cold, but from the contagious, palpable energy of the gathering. Even the very smells of the longhouse shift. A pinch of dried sage is tossed onto the coals, and it fills the air with a clean sharpness, masking the heavy musk of hides. Someone nearby chews on dried berries, sweetening their breath. You inhale, and it feels as though the longhouse has transformed. It's no longer just a survival chamber, but a sacred space. And there's another quirky aside here. Some accounts suggest that during long ceremonies, the smoke holes were adjusted deliberately to keep the chamber denser with smoke. This was done to enhance the dramatic glow of the firelight, and perhaps to add to the overall spiritual effect. Imagine that, choosing a thicker haze not for warmth, but for atmosphere, so that the spirits seemed nearer and the stories more vivid. The practical and the mystical blurred, until one fed the other. Children, of course, were at the very heart of these gatherings. Tucked securely between elders, they listened wide-eyed to the tales of heroes and tricksters. These were lessons coded in entertainment. Their laughter rippled out like sparks. Their questions kept the elders sharp, and their very presence guaranteed continuity. Each story retold ensured that when these children grew, they would tell the exact same tales, under the exact same rafters, keeping not just the house, but the culture warm against winter's endless chill. And while the community shared these myths and rituals, motion itself kept the cold at bay. A sudden burst of drumming, a playful chase of children down the aisle, or even just the rhythmic stomping of feet, all of it sent heat coursing through limbs. You shift in your place, stamping lightly, and you feel how quickly the warmth follows. It isn't modern aerobics, but it works. Historians still disagree on just how much this ritual life revolved around pure survival. Some argue it was practical first, spiritual second. Others believe the opposite, that the ceremonies created the will to endure, which in turn enabled survival. The line is thin, blurred by memory and interpretation. But for you, sitting here wrapped in fur while the stories swirl around, the answer doesn't really matter. What matters is the way this warmth flows, not just from the fire, but from the bonds of voices joined together in the night. The storm outside is still there, clawing at the bark, but inside, you hardly notice anymore. The longhouse hums with song and laughter and dance. And in that living, breathing soundscape, you physically feel the cold retreat. It's not defeated, never entirely banished, but it is held back by the oldest shield humanity has ever wielded, the power of story and of shared spirit. You lean your head back against the hide behind you, your eyelids growing heavy, lulled by the voices. You realize that warmth truly has many faces. Tonight, it glows in the fire, it pulses in the footsteps, and it whispers in the tales passed down through generations. And as you drift closer to sleep, the final realization settles over you. Sometimes the surest way to keep from freezing is to keep the soul burning bright. You shift slightly beneath the heavy hides, and in that movement, you notice how carefully, how deliberately, everyone seems to be positioned. A baby is nestled securely between its mother and grandmother, the elders' bodies forming a living, breathing wall of warmth around the fragile child. A boy, perhaps 10 years old, squeezes himself closer to his uncle, while his father stretches out on the other side, forming an outer buffer. In this smoky, crowded chamber, you realize this arrangement is no accident. It is a precise strategy, perfected over generations. Ethnographers who studied these communities often point out that the sleeping order inside the Longhouses mirrored both practicality and culture. The youngest, who lose body heat the fastest, were always placed between older, warmer relatives. Infants, especially, rarely slept alone. They were sandwiched for insulation, the softest hides tucked carefully around them. Elders, though they might generate less heat themselves, provided steady, protective bulk. In this way, all the bodies became layers, stacked like living insulation within a wall. To lie where you were told was less about personal comfort than it was about stark survival mathematics. One charming detail emerges from oral traditions. Children were sometimes teased awake if they wriggled free of their protective family sandwich. "You want to be a frozen rabbit?" An aunt might scold, before tugging them back beneath the furs. The shared laughter softened the warning, but the meaning was deadly serious. Drifting away from the group in the middle of the night could mean shivering uncontrollably, dangerously before morning. The mockery kept them close, and it kept them alive. Scholars still differ when interpreting how rigid these sleeping positions actually were. Some suggest that households rotated who slept in the coveted middle spots or on the drafty edges, balancing comfort with responsibility. Others argue that kinship strictly dictated placement. Infants always between parents, elders near the fire, while younger men and women were expected to fend off the drafts at the periphery. The archaeological traces of longhouse bunks don't resolve the matter. All we have are accounts written centuries later. Was the system flexible, or was it strictly enforced? The debate continues, leaving us to imagine multiple nightly choreographies. As you lie there, you can feel the heat gradient for yourself. The center of the huddled group is warm, almost too warm, while the edge near the drafty seam nips at your skin. Being pressed into the middle is not glamorous. You're smothered, perhaps overheated, with elbows in your ribs, but it is far preferable to the icy whisper on the outside. You realize that this sacrifice rotated through the generations. Children were protected at all costs, elders buffered where they could, and the stronger bodies absorbed the discomfort for the sake of the group. The sensory experience of this arrangement is intense. A child's small hand presses against your chest, damp with sleep sweat. An elder's breath rasps steadily, right behind your ear. Every inch of available space is filled with contact knees, arms, shoulders, all overlapping until you feel less like an individual and more like part of one large, many-limbed organism. Privacy completely evaporates. Warmth replaces it. A curious aside, some accounts mention charms or amulets being tied to the poles just above children's bunks. These small pouches of herbs, feathers, or carved figures dangled near where they slept, and were thought to shield them from bad dreams or illness. Practical or not, the presence of these little bundles certainly reassured parents. Combined with the protective wall of family bodies, the child was encased in both physical and spiritual insulation. Of course, this profound closeness sometimes sparked conflict. Snoring was a nightly villain. Someone's uncle might rumble like thunder until frustrated cousins elbowed him awake. Babies cried, toddlers kicked, dogs barked. But even amid all that noise, the placement persisted. Complaints did not alter the system because everyone understood, on a fundamental level, that this arrangement saved lives. It was better to endure the irritation than to risk losing a child to the cold. What fascinates anthropologists is how this nightly practice actively shaped cultural identity. The physical act of pressing together reinforced the emotional lesson. You survive as a community, not as individuals. The youngest were cared for by the oldest. The strong endured for the weak. and everyone shared the consequences. The sleeping order became a living metaphor for the clan itself, interdependent, layered, and deeply protective. You roll slightly, feeling how your own body fits into this pattern. Your hip meets another's thigh, your arm brushes a child's hair, your back presses against a grandmother's shoulder. You are, at once, both protected and protector, both shield and shielded. The system makes no distinction between warmth and duty. Here, they are the same thing. The storm outside rattles the walls again, and a fresh, sharp draft slips through a high seam. The baby stirs, whimpering. Instantly, the grandmother tightens her hold, pulling the hides tighter, pressing her chest forward to block the cold. The entire group shifts unconsciously, sealing gaps, readjusting, relayering the living quilt. It is an instinct as natural and as necessary as breathing. No one thinks, I must protect the baby. They simply do, because that is the rhythm of Longhouse life. And in that rhythm, you begin to understand something profound. Survival isn't only about fires, or hides, or moss. It's about bodies arranged with intention. It is love expressed through shared warmth. It is generations, physically interwoven through the night. You close your eyes, press tight, and realize that here, against the winter, family itself is the blanket. You blink awake later to the faint, dull glow of embers. Your gaze drifts upward, and you notice the rafters overhead. They loom like a vast wooden lattice high above the smoke, crisscrossed beams straining under the weight of time and soot. And dangling from those beams, you see the dark silhouettes of tools, baskets, and even weapons objects suspended above the bunks like strange, practical ornaments in the smoky gloom. At first glance, it just seems cluttered. But soon, you realize there is an incredible cleverness at play here. The rafters are not just structural. They are storage, they are insulation, and sometimes they are even radiators of warmth. Archaeologists often point out that these longhouses doubled as warehouses. Tools of daily life, bows, fishing gear, large baskets of dried corn were hung from the rafters, where the constant, rising smoke preserved them. Keeping things off the ground protected them from pests, kept them dry, and, crucially, freed up precious space on the sleeping platforms below. Every inch of the interior carried a purpose, from the lowest plank to the highest beam. Here's a curious little aside. Some families even dangled their snowshoes overhead, where the constant smoke would cure and harden the sinew lacing. By the time the spring thaw came, those shoes were ready to hit the slush, already perfectly tempered by months of the indoor haze. You can almost picture someone tugging down a pair, brushing the soot off the frame, and slipping them on as if the smoke was simply another tool in their workshop. There is still disagreement among historians about how much warmth these suspended items truly contributed. Some argue that the dense collections of baskets and bundles created an insulating ceiling, effectively slowing the escape of heat. Others dismiss that idea, suggesting the effect was negligible compared to the fire itself. But as you sit where you are now, you feel it. Warmth is rising, getting caught by the objects overhead, and then radiating faintly back downward, like a primitive attic blanket. The rafters hold not only tools, but also a thin, invisible layer of trapped heat. The sensory experience is rich. You catch the dry, soft rattle of corn kernels shifting in a basket when someone bumps a support pole. You hear the hollow clunk of a wooden club swinging gently in the draft. Above your head, cured pelts flutter slightly, releasing the deep smell of fur and smoke. The ceiling becomes a whispering chorus of objects, each one telling its own story of survival. Some of those stories are spiritual. Oral traditions describe charms and sacred items suspended near the rafters, meant to protect the household from misfortune, a carved figure, a bundle of feathers, a pouch of herbs. They weren't just storage, they were guardians. To lie beneath them was to sleep under the watchful eyes of spirits, as though the longhouse itself had hung its own private constellation of protectors above your dreams. And then there is the practical reality. By hanging gear overhead, you kept it warm enough to handle. Imagine grabbing a spear or an axe that had been left outside overnight. The wood or bone would freeze to your skin instantly. But up here, Above the fires, the wood stayed dry, sinew remained flexible, and leather stayed pliable. The tools were always ready, not brittle and stiff with cold. It was a small but essential difference, one that might mean life or death when hunting or defending the village. A final quirky detail. In some accounts, smoked fish and meat dangled so low that children were constantly scolded for sneaking bites in the night. The temptation must have been overwhelming, with those salty, oily aromas drifting down as you lay hungry on your bunk. Some elders even joked that the hardest part of surviving winter wasn't the cold, but keeping the children from raiding the pantry that hung just inches above their noses. The rafters, however, were not without risk. Sparks sometimes leapt upward from the fires, threatening to ignite the dry-stored hides or baskets. Families had to be careful, adjusting the fire's size and watching for rogue embers. Stories circulate of disastrous blazes, of whole longhouses consumed because one spark found its way into the wrong bundle. That danger was always present, a reminder that warmth and destruction were uneasy neighbours. Still, the rafters defined the atmosphere. You glance upward again, noting how the beams disappear into shadow, the soot blackening everything into one long, smoky tapestry. It feels like lying beneath a forest turned upside down, its branches heavy with fruit. Except here, the fruit is your livelihood, dangling quietly, protectively, above you. Some researchers believe that this overhead storage added not just warmth, but a deep sense of psychological comfort. To look up and see food, tools, and weapons all around you was to feel secure, even in the dead of winter. Hunger and danger pressed at the walls, but reassurance dangled from the rafters. You slept not beneath an empty void, but beneath abundance. It was a ceiling that whispered, "You have enough." The soundscape deepens as people begin to stir. Someone reaches up, pulling down a basket, its wicker creaking. Another shifts a bough to one side. These little movements join the fire's crackle and the wind's moan outside, creating a layered music of survival. Nothing is wasted space here. The house itself is a three-dimensional puzzle. Every layer is filled, every corner pressed into service. You settle back, closing your eyes, comforted by the sense of provision hanging over you. Tools, charms, food, and weapons, all suspended in the smoky rafters, all keeping you warm in ways both direct and indirect. You realize then that the longhouse isn't just a shelter. It's a living organism, with bones, skin, and now, a ceiling that breathes with memory and provision. The fire spits softly, and a faint drip lands on your shoulder. At first you think it's snow sneaking in through the smoke hole, but when you brush it away, your fingers come back damp, not cold. You tilt your head and realize the truth. Condensation. The longhouse, for all its structural brilliance, has a relentless internal enemy: moisture. One thing archaeologists repeatedly highlight is that moisture management was a constant, nagging challenge. With dozens of people breathing, cooking, and sweating inside this enclosed bark and moss structure, the humidity built quickly. Warm, damp air from fires and lungs would rise, hit the cold bark roof, and water would condense. Drips fell in the night, sometimes harmlessly, but sometimes soaking hides and mats until they reeked of mildew. The battle was not only against the cold outside, but against the dampness within a dampness that could steal warmth as cruelly as any draught. There's a peculiar and miserable observation from a 17th century missionary. He complained that his bedding in a longhouse grew so damp overnight that he often woke feeling colder than if he had simply slept outside under the stars. He didn't mean the fire had failed. He meant that the insidious wetness seeped into every single layer, pulling the warmth from his body anyway. You can almost picture him muttering curses while wringing out his cloak, surrounded by families who had long since learned the tricks to mitigate this very problem. What were those tricks? Some families laid extra, disposable mats beneath their sleeping hides, layering reeds that were designed to absorb the drips before they reached precious skin. Others angled the bark panels on the roof to intentionally funnel moisture towards the walls and away from the central bunks. Children might be tasked with flipping the damp bedding toward the fire to dry, a constant, nightly game of rotation. Because of this, the longhouse smelled perpetually of steaming hides and mats, as something was always being dried out. Scholars, naturally, diverge on how severe this moisture problem truly was. Some argue it was a minor inconvenience, perhaps exaggerated by outsiders who were unused to communal living. Others insist it was a daily frustration, forcing constant vigilance and likely contributing to the persistent coughs and lung troubles. The truth is likely, as always, somewhere in between. Enough to annoy, sometimes enough to endanger, but never enough to prevent survival. The sensory details make the problem vivid. You hear the faint, irregular patter of drops hitting the mats, sounding almost like rain inside the house. You smell the sour tang of damp bark, heavily mixed with smoke. You feel that unmistakable clammy chill when a blanket that was warm just an hour ago turns cold and heavy with absorbed moisture. And yet, alongside this profound irritation, you also notice the resilience it forged. People adapted, they shifted, they invented small, clever fixes that added up. A quirky aside comes from oral histories that mention ashes being spread beneath the bunks. Not only did the dry ash help insulate against drafts coming up from the ground, but it also acted as a powerful desiccant. A dry powder beneath your sleeping platform could catch the leaks, keeping moisture from pooling. Imagine lying just above a layer of yesterday's fire, protected by the very same ash that once burned as wood recycling at its most practical. Dogs, too, played their part. Their constant shifting and shaking helped redistribute the dampness. When a wet flap brushed them at the entrance, they would shake off sprays of water, sending droplets atomizing into the smoky air. Annoying, yes, but it cleared the water from their fur before they leapt onto the bunks, keeping the blankets from getting soaked even worse. You sigh as one such spray dots your face, realizing that even these nuisances carry hidden benefits. Moisture had a subtler danger as well. Mold. The longhouse walls, stuffed with organic reeds and moss, could harbor growth when perpetually damp. Some accounts describe a strong, earthy odor, likely the smell of mold spores lingering in the seams. Whether this caused widespread illness or was just tolerated is, like so much, debated. Some scholars suggest it led to higher rates of lung issues. Others dismiss the evidence as anecdotal. The argument remains unresolved, lingering just like the smell of mildew itself. Still, nightly life pressed on. The act of drying became part of the routine. Families draped damp hides near the embers. They turned their mats. They rearranged their bedding. The glow of the fire wasn't just for warmth. It was a communal drying rack. The air shimmered with steam as moisture lifted away, only to return with the next round of breathing, cooking, and snow seepage. Survival was a constant rhythm of damp and dry, never permanent, always in flux. There's even a dark humor found in the struggle. One oral account recalls children teasing each other by catching the drips in their mouths, pretending it was roof rain. Adults would scold them, but you can imagine the laughter cutting through the gloom. Even this hardship became a game when reframed through young eyes. As you shift under your hides, a fresh drip falls, cold, on your wrist. You wipe it away and tuck the hide tighter. It is not comfortable, it is not ideal, but it is endurable. And that is the theme of the longhouse in winter. Not perfection, but persistence. Warmth never came unchallenged. Every advantage carried its own steep drawback. Smoke that warmed, but also choked. Hides that insulated, but also stank. Walls that protected, but also dripped. And yet, here you are, damp, smoky, crowded, but alive. The fire glows. The hides hold. The family snores around you. Moisture may gnaw at the edges of your comfort, but it doesn't claim the center. You close your eyes again, listening to the drip, drip, like a strange lullaby, proof that even imperfection can be survived. Night after night, winter after winter, the drip of condensation fades as the fire is fed again, and your eyes catch the pile stacked carefully against the inner wall. A mountain of logs, some split, some whole, some already half-charred, sits ready, just within reach of the hearth. It looks almost like a second wall, a barricade made of wood. You realize this pile is just as crucial as the hides covering your body, or the moss stuffed in the seams. Without it, the long house would go dark, and everyone inside would shiver themselves toward despair. Historians are nearly unanimous on this point. Firewood was currency. Families spent enormous back-breaking effort, stockpiling it before the snow sealed the forest. In autumn, groups ventured out to cut, haul, and stack massive cords of wood, knowing that each single stick would later mean another hour of warmth. Villages competed with time itself, racing to gather enough fuel before the storms made travel impossible. When you glance at the neat rows stacked indoors now, you are seeing months of hard labor compressed into one glowing, vital pile. A curious little detail surfaces in some oral accounts. Children were sometimes given the chore of feeding the fire, not as a punishment, but as a genuine badge of responsibility. Imagine a small child creeping up in the dead of night, guided only by the dull glow, carefully sliding one log into the embers, then scampering back to their bunk. That small act, repeated countless times, carried a family through. Parents trusted their children to hold the line against the cold, one stick at a time. Experts debate whether the wood supply was always sufficient. Some argue that communities planned so meticulously that they rarely ran short. Others insist that shortages were common, forcing families to burn desperation. Fuel bark stripped from trees, dried roots, or even dismantled sections of abandoned structures. Archaeological evidence of ash layers, mixed with odd materials, splintered poles, charred reed mats, suggests that desperation fires did, in fact, occur. You can almost hear the quiet groan of someone breaking apart an old basket, muttering, "Better fuel than furniture." The sensory landscape of the woodpile is vivid. You smell the sharp resin of pine, piercing even under the thick layers of smoke. The logs creak and pop faintly as they continue to dry in the heat. Your hand brushes their rough surfaces, splinters prickling your skin. The pile radiates reassurance simply by existing, like a bank account you can draw warmth from at will. And a quirky aside, wood wasn't just stacked indoors. Some longhouses stored logs beneath the raised sleeping platforms, hidden from sight but close enough to reach without venturing outside. Imagine leaning over the edge of your bunk in the middle of the night, fishing out a log and tossing it toward the fire, all without ever leaving your blanket. Lazy? Maybe. Practical? Absolutely. And yet, the labor never truly ended. Every few days, someone still had to brave the outdoors to fetch more. You picture a figure wrapped in furs, crunching through waist-high snow, dragging a heavy sled of logs back to the door. Their breath fogs the night air. Their arms ache, and frost clings to their eyebrows. They stomp back inside, shaking snow onto the mats, only to hear someone call out, "We'll need more wood tomorrow." It is thankless, endless, but utterly necessary work. One ethnographer noted that firewood was so central to survival that disputes sometimes arose over who had rights to which pile within a communal longhouse. Did one family contribute more? Did another take too much? Sharing warmth, it turns out, could be as politically fraught as sharing food. Scholars still disagree on how those conflicts were resolved, through strict preset rules, through casual generosity, or through tense, nightly negotiation. The answer is likely all three, depending on the village and the severity of the season. You glance at the fire now and feel the rhythm of dependence. The embers glow red, logs crackle, sparks leap upward. Then, the glow dims, the warmth falters, and someone stirs to add another log. The fire surges back to life. Shadows dance again, and the cycle continues. Warmth is never permanent. It must be constantly fed. The sound is its own comfort. Logs fall with a soft thud. Splinters hiss as they ignite. Coals sigh as the fresh fuel settles in. You listen to this wood-fed heartbeat, knowing that without it, silence would creep in, the terrible final silence of cold, seeping into every bone. There's something symbolic, too, about this indoor forest. The logs stacked around you are the trees of summer, cut down and carried in, now burning slowly to hold life through the winter. The forest lives on inside the house, transformed into heat and light. It's a reminder of the deep bond between the people and the land, of how survival depends on an endless, living dialogue with the world outside. And so you settle deeper into your furs, watching as another log is laid carefully onto the fire. Sparks leap, shadows flicker, and the warmth swells again. The woodpile shrinks by one, But the longhouse breathes easier. It is a trade, simple but profound. The tree gives itself, the fire receives it, and you live to see another dawn. The fresh log finally catches. Embers flare, and in that faint, candle-like glow, you suddenly notice how your own breath turns visible. Each exhale rises as a ghostly plume, joining the smoke already hovering in the air above. Dozens of other breaths are mingling with yours, creating a collective haze, a miasma that thickens the air into something almost tangible. In the middle of the night, it feels as though you are lying inside a cloud, one spun not from water, but from fire, lungs, and memory. Early observers of longhouse life remarked often on this very sight. The vapor of human breath drifting in the cold air, illuminated by the firelight. They noted it was both eerie and profoundly reassuring. Eerie, because it reminded you constantly of how thin the line was between life and death, your warmth visibly escaping your body, proof of how quickly it could all be lost. But it was also reassuring, because the sight of so many interlocking breath clouds meant you were not alone. You were surrounded by others, all fighting the exact same battle, all alive together in the shared darkness. A curious, charming little observation comes from oral stories describing how children made games out of this breath. They would puff exaggerated clouds, trying to outdo one another, or hold their mouths close to the firelight to see whose mist shone the brightest. Laughter, muffled by hides, carried through the smoke, softening the immediate harshness of the night. In the simplest, most human way, play turned this vulnerability into joy. Scholars, however, inevitably disagree on how much this collective breath really changed the climate inside. Some argue that dozens of lungs constantly exhaling added significant humidity and warmth, perhaps raising the temperature by several crucial degrees. Others suggest the effect was merely marginal, noting that without the constant, roaring fire, body heat alone could never sustain comfort. The debate lingers, but as you lie here, you feel the truth in your bones. The warmth cocooning you doesn't just come from the flames. It comes from every single inhale and exhale, pooling together like an invisible, living quilt. The sensory details are unmistakable. Your own breath tastes of smoke, faintly tinged with the corn soup from earlier. Your skin feels clammy where the vapor condenses, slick for just a moment before it evaporates again. You hear the soft, rhythmic hiss of lungs in unison, a soundless choir exhaling into the rafters. Every one of your senses reminds you that the air itself is part of the survival strategy recycled endlessly, thickened with the tangible evidence of life. And there's an odd practicality here too. The mingling of breath and smoke made the air dense enough to help ward off some pests. Fleas, gnats, and even mice apparently disliked the heavy, acrid atmosphere, retreating to the cracks and corners. What was stifling and uncomfortable to you was a powerful deterrent to them. In a strange twist, one person's discomfort became the entire household's protection. A quirky note appears in some Jesuit records. European visitors complained that the smoky, breath-laden air left them feeling dizzy and sick, while their native hosts seemed entirely unfazed. Adaptation, over generations, had turned what might suffocate a visitor into a tolerable, ignorable norm for the residents. Your lungs sting, yes, but you also realize you can endure it. Maybe not with grace, maybe with a cough or two, but enough. Enough to rest, and enough to wake again. The flicker of the firelight turns each exhale into a momentary apparition. You watch the faces of the others, half lit, their breath streaming upward like spirit animals rising to the roof. For some nations, smoke and breath together symbolized a deep connection to the unseen world. Prayers were carried skyward on the exact same current that carried the warmth. It was as though every sigh and every whisper joined the fire's offering, drifting up through the smoke hole toward the stars. But practical issues returned, again and again. When too many people breathed in one small space, the oxygen thinned, and the air grew dangerously heavy. Some longhouses had deliberate vents cut low near the ground, designed to draw in fresh air, balancing the smoke holes far above. Others relied on the sheer, accidental draft through the door flaps. The system was never perfect, but the balance oxygen in, smoke out was maintained just enough to avoid disaster. Modern reconstructions still spark arguments about how breathable those nights truly were. Some visitors describe a tolerable haziness. Others stumble out coughing, their eyes streaming. Scholars continue to debate whether the residents were simply tougher or whether their structures were cleverly managed in ways that modern outsiders have overlooked. Yet the image of breath remains central. Every single exhale is a reminder. You are alive, you are fragile, and you are bound inextricably to those around you. Alone, your small cloud of breath would vanish instantly into the cold. But together, your breaths gather, filling the house with the visible, tangible evidence of persistence. You close your eyes and imagine the longhouse as a giant, living lung, inhaling the snow-frosted air and exhaling smoke and steam. And you, just one small set of lungs among many, are an essential part of its rhythm. The night deepens, but you find yourself drifting more easily now. The sound of breathing becomes your lullaby. The misty air becomes your blanket. The cold prowls just beyond the bark, but inside, the combined force of breath, smoke, and fire has built a fragile but truly enduring sanctuary. You surrender to it, your own lungs rising and falling with the chorus, and let sleep fold over you once more. You stir again, rubbing your eyes against the persistent haze of smoke, and you notice something new hanging over one of the bunks. It isn't a hide or a basket. It's a woven wool blanket, brightly dyed, and patterned with stripes unlike anything produced from local reeds or animal skins. You blink at it, confused for a moment, realizing this object must come from far beyond this forest, from across seas and ships. This is a trade blanket, introduced by Europeans, and it is slowly weaving its way into the ancient, nightly rhythm of longhouse life. Accounts from the 17th and 18th centuries consistently describe these blankets arriving through complex trade networks. Woolens, brought by Dutch, French, or English traders, were exchanged for the valuable furs and pelts the longhouse residents procured. For the native families, these blankets were both a novelty and a new form of utility. They were lighter than heavy bear hides, they were quicker to dry by the fire, and they were striking in their vibrant colors. You can only imagine the wonder of seeing one for the first time, comparing its manufactured softness to supple deerskin, marveling at how easily it folded and how tightly it seemed to hold the warmth. There's a curious little detail found in the journals of early traders. At first, families sometimes cut these valuable blankets into strips, sewing them into coats or leggings, treating them less as bedding and more as a versatile, precious fabric. But eventually, the simplest and most obvious use won out. At night, the wool lay across sleeping bodies, adding a completely new texture to the nightly quilt. Imagine slipping beneath one now. Its fibers feel scratchy, almost coarse, compared to the supple oiliness of a hide. But its weight feels somehow familiar to your modern sensibilities. Historians, naturally, still disagree on how quickly such trade goods displaced the traditional materials. Some argue they became coveted immediately, prized as status symbols, and began to replace hides within a generation. Others suggest they remained merely supplementary, treasured, certainly, but rare, never fully overtaking the sheer practicality and availability of local furs. Excavations of burial sites from the period show both. Some individuals are found wrapped in wool, others are still carefully shrouded in deerskin. The balance between the old and the new remains unresolved, a picture blurred by trade's uneven reach. For you, lying here, the sensory shift is immediate. Wool smells different. It carries the scent of lanolin, earthy but far cleaner than smoke-soaked hides. It doesn't carry the deep, animal musk of the creatures hunted in this forest. Its texture is less oily, more fibrous. When you lay it across your chest, it warms quickly, almost too quickly, holding onto your body heat like a sponge. Compared to the stiff, heavy creak of a hide, this wool is pliant, folding around your body with very little resistance. It's no wonder so many families embraced it. And yet, the hides do not vanish. They still line the bunks, they pad the floor, and they hang over the drafty seams. The wool blanket is simply layered on top, a newcomer joining the ancient ensemble. You can feel the distinct difference between the two layers. You feel the sleek, dense heaviness of the fur pressing down, and the springy, scratchy resilience of the wool on top. Together, they create a hybrid warmth, old and new, clasping each other like uneasy allies. A quirky aside comes from oral traditions. The colours themselves became symbols. Bright red stripes were thought to signal vitality. Blue represented water, green, the forest. These blankets were not merely bedding, they were canvases of meaning, gifts exchanged in diplomacy or displayed in ceremonies. You can imagine the children tugging at them, not just for the warmth, but simply because the bright hues cut so sharply through the winter's otherwise monotone grey. But along with this new comfort, the trade goods carried complications. Wool, it was learned, absorbed sparks far more readily than cured hides, creating a new and dangerous fire hazard. It also moulded quickly when it got damp, a significant danger in the moist, humid, longhouse air. Families had to learn to dry them carefully, draping them near the hearth, constantly balancing the risk against the necessity. And as the blankets spread, so too did a dependence on outside trade, a profound shift that historians often debate. Did these new goods enhance survival, or did they begin the slow erosion of traditional self-sufficiency? Scholars argue both sides, leaving us with a story that is part warmth and part warning. Still, lying beneath one now, you cannot deny its appeal. The blanket feels oddly familiar, like a bridge between your world and theirs. You trace its woven fibers, noticing that soot is already clinging to it, and new stains are blending with the old stripes. It has been adopted fully into this smoky ecosystem. It is no longer foreign, it has been transformed by use. The longhouse hums as people around you adjust their own layers. Some curl deeper under their traditional hides, others pull the new wool tighter. This mix of textures becomes a nightly experiment, with each family discovering what combination works best. You realize that survival here isn't frozen in tradition. It adapts. It adapts layer by layer, trade by trade, story by story. The fire crackles, the snow presses, the wind moans, but inside, under hides and wool alike, the people breathe steadily. The old and the new coexist, imperfect but effective. You close your eyes and let the blanket's dense warmth seep into your bones, understanding that survival has always been about weaving together whatever threads are at hand. The wool blanket scratches faintly against your chin as you shift, and for a moment, you think of comfort. But you realize that comfort here isn't measured in softness. It's measured in whether or not the warmth lasts until dawn. That very thought leads your mind downward, toward the fire pits at the center of the aisle. You have been watching them for nights now, and you've noticed a peculiar, brilliant trick. Even when the high flames die down, the longhouse doesn't grow instantly, terribly cold. The secret, you see, lies beneath the ashes. Archaeologists have uncovered deep layers of ash in excavated longhouse sites, thick, stratified beds, right beneath where the fires once burned. These were not accidents of neglect. They were deliberate. Families learned to rake the glowing, red-hot coals into the bed of ash, burying them completely. In doing so, they smouldered slowly, releasing a steady, low heat for hours. The ashes insulated the fire itself, trapping the precious embers like eggs in a nest, ready to be stirred back into full flame come morning. What looks like simple, grey dust is, in truth, a hidden furnace. Here's a quirky observation, recorded by an early settler. He marveled at how quickly his hosts could rekindle a fire at dawn. There was no flint, no frantic struggle, just a single poke into last night's ash, and the embers glowed alive again, hungry for a new log. Imagine waking in the dark, shivering, and knowing that warmth is buried right at your fingertips, just waiting. You reach in cautiously, careful not to burn your hand, and stir life back into the house. Scholars continue to debate the true efficiency of these ash beds. Some argue they released enough steady, radiant heat to noticeably warm the interior all through the night. Others think their main value was simple convenience, saving valuable time and resources by preserving the embers, rather than starting from scratch each morning. Excavations reveal ash layers so thick they suggest years of continuous use, but just how much heat they truly gave off remains contested. What isn't disputed is their central role in the daily rhythm. The fire, it seems, never truly died. It only slept under its blanket of grey. The sensory dimension is powerful. You can smell the faint, acrid tang of old ash, a smell entirely different from fresh wood smoke. It's like earth and fire have been fused. When you brush your fingers near the hearth, the ash feels powdery and cool at the very top, but then suddenly, intensely hot just below the surface, like sand on a beach at midday. That hidden warmth reassures you. The house never truly goes dark, even when the flames appear to be gone. A curious detail surfaces in some oral histories. People sometimes used those ashes far beyond the hearth. Ashes were sprinkled beneath the bunks, where they absorbed dampness like a natural desiccant. Others smeared ash on hides as an insect repellent, or even used it as a primitive soap when mixed with animal fat. The hearth produced far more than just heat. It produced tools, medicine, and even cleaning supplies. You realize that each handful of ash was treated as treasure, not as waste. Picture the nightly ritual. The fire burns brightly through the evening meals and stories. Then, as people settle under their hides, someone carefully rakes the embers, burying them beneath the ash, covering them gently as if tucking children into bed. Hours later, the room glows only faintly, but the warmth lingers, though the flames are gone. In the morning, someone stirs the mound, and the fire leaps up as if it had never slept at all. The rhythm is seamless, almost magical, but it is built entirely on human observation and patience. Of course, risks accompanied this practice. Balance was everything. Too much ash, packed too tightly, could smother the fire completely, leaving the house dangerously cold by morning. Too little ash, and sparks could leap free, threatening to ignite the dry mats or hides. Families learned by trial and error, guided by the knowledge of generations who had already paid the price for those mistakes. There's even a humor found in this precarious system. Imagine someone teasing their neighbor, "Your ashes are lazy." Mine kept burning all night. A pride in ember keeping became a quiet contest. Each family convinced their hearth burned more faithfully than the next. In a world where survival was a nightly negotiation, such small rivalries softened the sharp edge of fear. As you watch the hearth now, the deep, dull glow beneath the ash mesmerizes you. It's like a secret heartbeat, steady and unseen, pulsing life into the long house even as everyone sleeps. You understand, suddenly, why those early European visitors found it so remarkable. Because it was both practical and poetic. To bury fire under ash was to turn destruction into protection, to turn chaos into endurance. The storm outside claws again, rattling the bark and flapping the hide door. But inside, the warmth lingers, drawn not from roaring, visible flames, but from quiet, stubborn coals hidden beneath a blanket of grey powder. You settle deeper into your furs, breathing in the earthy, acrid smoke, and you feel a deep gratitude for this humble, brilliant invention. Ash, so often dismissed as dead, is here the true guardian of the night. You close your eyes with that thought, comforted by the idea that while you sleep, the longhouse itself sleeps with you. Its heart buried under layers of ash, patiently waiting to breathe fire again when the morning calls. You roll onto your side, tugging the heavy hides tighter, and suddenly you feel it, a tiny tickle against your neck. Instinctively, you scratch. Then, you scratch again. Of course, you realize, warmth doesn't come free. In the crowded, humid closeness of the longhouse, every glowing ember that saves you also saves the smallest, most uninvited of guests. Fleas, lice, and other pests that thrive in the thick press of people, hides, and dogs. Ethnographers consistently note that infestations were simply a part of daily life. When dozens of bodies huddled together under layers of fur, when dogs nestled against the bunks, when mats and hides were reused season after season, these pests found their paradise. No one escaped completely. Warmth meant survival for the humans, but it also meant a perfect breeding ground for creatures eager to nibble at their skin. And yet people were not helpless. There's an intriguing detail preserved in oral traditions. Smoke itself was medicine. The thick, eye-stinging haze that outsiders so often hated actually worked as a powerful fumigator. Families would, at times, deliberately close the smoke holes for stretches, filling the chamber with a dense cloud until the insects dropped from the hides or fled. Imagine lying low near the floor, coughing, your eyes watering, and hearing someone mutter, "At least the fleas won't survive the night." The smoke was both torment and cure, leaving behind a strange, bittersweet comfort. Scholars debate just how effective these smoky cleansings truly were. Some argue the density of smoke needed to kill pests would have made breathing nearly unbearable, suggesting these were only partial, desperate solutions. Others point to ethnobotanical evidence of specific herbs being added to the fire: cedar, sage, sweetgrass that produced an aromatic smoke with known insect-repellent qualities. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Not a perfect eradication, but just enough relief to make life tolerable. The sensory experience right now confirms it. You smell the sharp, clean bite of cedar tossed into the fire, mingling with the ordinary wood smoke. You hear the soft hiss as the green herbs catch, filling the air with an acrid sweetness. Your skin prickles as you feel the insects scatter. Some crawl away, others are subdued. You realize the longhouse is both a bed and a battlefield. The air itself has been enlisted as a weapon. Here's a quirky little observation. Children sometimes competed to catch lice, pinching them between their fingernails and gleefully tallying their victories. What horrified outsiders became, for them, just another game in the smoky chamber. Laughter turned this constant irritation into play, normalizing what could not be fully avoided. You can just imagine a grandmother, chuckling at the sight, muttering that her grandchildren were at least learning patience. But these pests weren't only annoyances. They carried a real risk. Scratching could open skin to infection, and in such close quarters, illness spread with terrifying ease. That's why the smoke and the herbs mattered so much. They weren't just for comfort, but for protection against more serious, cascading harm. Families layered their furs carefully. They aired hides near the fire, and they rotated their sleeping mats, all to reduce infestations. Every task had a dual purpose: drying, warming, and defending against the crawling armies hidden in the seams. Scholars remain divided on how much these pests truly impacted health. Some argue they were constant but minor irritants, tolerated like background noise. Others suggest they contributed to chronic illness, weakening bodies that were already stressed by cold and hunger. The archaeological record can't tell us definitively, leaving us to weigh the stories of complaint against the undeniable fact that people survived, year after year, despite the nuisance. The sounds of the night remind you again. A child scratches furiously, then sighs. A dog, asleep, thumps its leg, shaking fleas loose onto the mats. Someone throws another small bundle of herbs on the coals, sending a fresh, fragrant plume spiraling upward. The long house adjusts, adapts, and endures. There is a symbolism here, too. Some cultures viewed these pests as tangible reminders of humility, proof that no one was above discomfort. Even chiefs itched, even healers scratched. In a way, the fleas were democracy embodied in insect form, indifferent to rank, always reminding you of your place in the shared itchy struggle. As you settle back into your hides, you feel another tickle and brush it away. It is not pleasant, but it is not catastrophic either. Compared to the wolves prowling outside, or the frost that is stiffening the earth, these tiny creatures are manageable, and in their own irritating way, they remind you of resilience. Life teems, even in the harshest nights. Where warmth exists, so does motion, and breath, and survival, whether human or insect. You exhale, coughing lightly at the herbal smoke, and you smile despite yourself. The pests may win these small battles, but the longhouse, ultimately, wins the war. With smoke, with laughter, and with endless patience, the household keeps the balance. And you, scratching your neck one last time and tugging the hides closer, drift back into an uneasy but enduring sleep. The smoke curls upward, thin and steady now, and you hear a faint murmur from the far end of the longhouse. It's not the ordinary chatter of families, or the cough of someone stoking the coals, but something softer, measured words, repeated low, like waves against a distant shore. You sit up slightly, listening, and you realize what you are hearing. Prayers, charms, whispered into the night. For the people here, warmth is not only physical, it is guarded by unseen forces, as carefully tended as the fire itself. Ethnographers who have listened to winter accounts note one clear truth: sleep was never left unguarded. Families believed that dreams could carry dangers just as real as frost. And just as moss blocked the drafts in the walls, charms and rituals were used to block harm from slipping into a person's slumber. Amulets dangled from the bunks, sacred herbs smouldered in the coals, and whispered words floated upward like invisible blankets. You realize the longhouse is both shelter and shrine. There is a curious detail found in Haudenosaunee oral tradition. Certain clans placed small, carved figures of owls or dogs above their bunks' protectors, believed to chase away harmful spirits during the most vulnerable hours. Imagine lying beneath one now, its soot-blackened eyes watching over you, the carved wood appearing both eerie and comforting in the faint firelight. To an outsider, it might seem like superstition. To those inside, it was as essential as the fur and the fire. Scholars still discuss how widespread these protective practices truly were. Some argue they were everyday routines, woven seamlessly into nightly life. Others suggest they were reserved only for times of illness, mourning, or special ritual seasons. The archaeological evidence for such charms is rare. Most were made of perishable wood, fiber, or feathers, but the oral testimony insists they were present. The uncertainty lingers, but the emotional reality does not. People needed more than just blankets to face the unknown dark. The sensory experience of it draws you in. The smell of burning sage drifts across the chamber, sharp and resinous, masking the heavy musk of the hides. A grandmother hums a song, in a language old enough to seem part of the smoke itself. A child near you clutches a small pouch of dried plants, its leather worn smooth by generations of hands. The flicker of the firelight turns each of these objects into a talisman, suddenly alive with meaning. A quirky aside appears in one Jesuit's journal. He described watching a family draw lines of ash across their children's foreheads before bed. The gesture, he thought, was mere superstition, but modern interpreters suggest it carried profound symbolic weight, ash as the fire's blessing, a protection against both cold and misfortune. Whether practical or spiritual, the act reveals how deeply intertwined warmth and belief really were. Dreams themselves were treated with immense seriousness. If someone dreamt of water or snow, the household might interpret it as a warning about cold seeping in. If fire appeared in a dream, it was taken as a reminder to tend the hearth more carefully. Sleep was not passive. It was an active dialogue with the forces beyond. You roll onto your side now, half smiling at the thought that even your own restless dreams tonight would have been woven into the household's lore. Scholars debate the balance between the practical and the spiritual in these routines. Did the charms genuinely alter the nightly warmth, or did they simply soothe minds enough to allow the body to relax into sleep? Some argue that this peace of mind was a survival tool, that calmer bodies conserved heat better. Others dismiss such explanations as modern rationalizing, suggesting that the people themselves would never have separated the practical from the spiritual in the first place. The debate continues, unresolved. But lying here, you feel the answer is simple. Belief is warmth. Confidence itself is insulation. The longhouse is quiet now, save for the rhythmic hum of prayers and the occasional soft crackle of the fire. You inhale the fragrant, sacred smoke, feel the carved figure's shadow above you, and you settle deeper into the hides. The storm outside may gnash its teeth, but inside, you are wrapped in layers of more than fur. You are guarded by stories, by charms, by whispered breath carrying promises into the dark. And as your eyelids close again, you realize the truth. Survival in the longhouse wasn't only about sealing out the cold. It was about sealing in courage, weaving strength and faith into the very fabric of nightly rest. You drift into sleep, held not only by the warmth of bodies and fire, but by the unseen embrace of spirits watching from the rafters. The next time you wake, it's not because of the cold, or the pests, or even someone shifting in the bunks. It is because the entire longhouse itself is groaning. The timbers creak like old bones. The bark walls rattle under invisible, pounding fists, and a thin, high-pitched shriek whistles through some unseen seam. You realize the winter storm has not passed. It has only gathered strength, and it is now roaring against the house with a relentless, terrifying fury. One observation that runs through nearly all early descriptions of these dwellings is how truly frightening the winter nights could sound from the inside. The bark and poles might be strong, but they were never silent. The wind turned the entire structure into an instrument, each seam vibrating with its own unique, piercing tone. Add to that the distant, sharp crash of ice cracking on the rivers, and the sudden pop of trees splitting in the frozen forest, and you have a symphony perfectly designed to keep nerves raw. Survival, you understand in this moment, wasn't just about keeping warm, it was about keeping calm. Here's a curious little detail noted by travelers. People sometimes compared the sound of a storm battering the longhouse to the deep growl of a living creature. Children were told, half joking, that the house was talking to them, reminding everyone to respect its protection. Imagine lying here, listening to the bark slap violently against the poles, and choosing to believe that the building itself was growling its disapproval of the wind. Oddly enough, that story, that small reframing, turned raw fear into potent reassurance. If the house was alive, then it was also fighting for you. Scholars, of course, still argue how much protection these structures truly offered. Some describe them as surprisingly sturdy, fully capable of withstanding blizzards that easily toppled smaller, single-family huts. Others emphasize their acute vulnerability, pointing to oral accounts of roofs being ripped open or entire walls caving in under the weight of massive snowdrifts. The archaeological ruins, when they are found, tell both stories. Some show clear evidence of decades of use, others show signs of sudden, catastrophic collapse. The debate continues, leaving you to wonder whether the long groan from the beams above you tonight is a final warning, or simply routine. The sensory details are overwhelming. You hear the roof groan, the heavy beams straining under the unseen weight of the snow. You smell the bark, freshly split by the intense cold, a scent as sharp and clean as resin. You feel new drafts crawl across your skin like icy fingers, the air inside shifting as the entire house physically flexes under the pressure. Even the fire reacts. The flames waver and dance, sparks swirl wildly, and the smoke shifts its direction as the wind bullies its way through the gaps. Every one of your senses reminds you that these walls are never absolute barriers. Inside, the people react, but they do so in a practiced, steady rhythm. A man rises from his bunk, pulling his hides around him, and presses new, thicker hides against a seam where the whistle is sharpest. A woman on another platform grabs her children closer, murmuring steady, calm words that mask her own worry. The dogs growl low in their chests, unsettled by sounds that mimic the predators of the forest. Yet no one panics. This is not their first storm. The longhouse was built not to be invulnerable, but to bend, to creak, and to hold, just enough. There is another quirky aside that comes from oral stories. Some households deliberately told legends of giants or sky spirits during the worst storms, their booming voices said to be the wind itself. Children, instead of trembling in fear, would sometimes giggle at the idea that all that noise was just storytelling from the heavens. You can almost hear a grandfather chuckling in the dark, weaving a tale about a giant stomping across the roof, his heavy steps shaking the bark. The story skillfully reframes terror into something bearable, perhaps even entertaining. Still, you feel your own heart race as another violent gust slams the house, rattling the tools that hang in the rafters. A spray of fine snow bursts through a high seam, scattering like salt onto the hides below. The cold invades quickly, biting your cheeks before someone can patch the gap. The long house is holding, but every shriek of the wind reminds you how thin that line truly is. Scholars also disagree on whether storms like this weakened the houses beyond repair. Some argue that the regular, constant patching made them last for decades, even generations. Others suggest that after only a few hard years, the houses were too compromised and needed to be rebuilt entirely. Excavated sites show evidence of both long use and sudden abandonment, and the truth may simply be that resilience varied from house to house. What's clear is that storms like this one were tests, nightly exams where failure meant death. And yet, even amid the fear, there is also a strange, stark beauty. The fire throws a cloud of sparks upward, and through a momentary opening in the roof vent, you glimpse snowflakes swirling down, caught in the orange glow, looking like falling stars. The wind howls, but inside you are cocooned in a different kind of sound. The crackling of wood, the sound of murmured prayers, the low animal growls, all layered together into a strange, discordant lullaby. The storm, you realize, isn't just outside. It has seeped into the very fabric of the long house, becoming part of the night's essential rhythm. You settle back, listening more closely now. The whistle of the wind turns rhythmic, almost musical. The groaning beams seem to creak in tempo with your own heartbeat. The storm's chaos resolves itself into patterns unpredictable, yet oddly soothing. You realize that to live here is to make peace with this noise, to transform it into background, to hear in it not doom, but endurance. The bark shakes again, but this time you no longer flinch. The house growls, and you smile faintly, imagining that it really is a living creature, hunched stubbornly against the cold, protecting its people with every fibre of its being. Outside, the world howls. Inside, the long house bends, but it does not break, and so you close your eyes once more, rocking gently with the storm's deep roar, letting its wild music lull you toward another uneasy but enduring sleep. The storm's deafening roar eventually fades into a muffled, distant hum, leaving the long house wrapped in an almost eerie stillness. In that sudden pause, you become acutely more aware of the intricate textures layered all around you. The sheer weight of the hides, the springy mats beneath, the rough scratch of the bark walls, even the faint, soft rasp of wool fibers near your face. You notice, perhaps for the first time, how deliberately every surface seems to have been arranged. Survival here, you understand, is fundamentally a matter of layers. It's not just in the construction of the walls and roofs, but in the meticulous way bodies, bedding, and clothing are stacked, almost like Russian dolls of insulation. This is one thing ethnographers consistently stress. The people of the Longhouse mastered the art of layering. They wore inner garments fashioned from softened deerskin, topped with heavier, warmer robes of fur. At night, they didn't shed these essential layers but simply slept in them, wrapping still more hides over the top for good measure. Mats woven from reeds or cattail stalks cushioned the hard wooden bunks. Thick hides went on top of those, then perhaps cloaks, then blankets. Heat trapped within each distinct layer stayed longer simply because it had to fight its way through barrier after barrier. It was, in essence, survival by accumulation. A curious little detail emerges from Jesuit records. Some families even layered their shelters within the larger longhouse structure. Smaller mats, or temporary partitions, were sometimes hung around individual bunks, effectively creating mini cocoons that trapped warmth far more efficiently than the open central aisle ever could. Imagine crawling into one right now, pushing aside a heavy hanging mat to slide into a confined space dense with furs, feeling your own breath bounce back at you from the makeshift walls, claustrophobic, perhaps, but undeniably warmer than the open air. Historians continue to discuss just how efficient these various nesting strategies truly were. Some suggest they allowed long house interiors to maintain surprisingly livable temperatures, even despite the most frigid storms outside. Others argue the effect was minimal, more psychological than genuinely thermal. Reconstructions built in modern museums have produced mixed results. Some become stiflingly hot, while others remain stubbornly drafty, no matter how many hides are hung. The lack of clear consensus leaves the truth hazy. But as you sink deeper into your own bundle of bedding, you don't need precise measurements to feel its profound worth. The sensory dimension is unmistakable. You can feel one layer cool to the touch, while the layer directly beneath it remains comfortably toasty. You hear the muffled rustle of woven mats rubbing against heavy hides, the faint creak of wood planks shifting slightly beneath the collective weight. The smell enveloping you is a complex mixture: smoke, saturated fur, grassy dried reeds, and a faint, lingering animal musk. This unique combination actively creates a microclimate, your own tiny cave, nested securely within the larger wooden ribcage of the house. There is even a quirky twist in how people manage these layers throughout the night. Some stories describe families actively rotating hides, flipping the colder outer layers closer to the fire to warm them up, or carefully laying new ones over sleeping children without waking them. Others mention people sleeping with extra garments simply piled on top, like ad hoc quilts not worn, but merely spread across their bodies. Everything that could possibly trap heat was pressed into service. And it wasn't only textiles. The food storage baskets and tools hanging overhead also became unintentional layers, buffering against drafts from above. Dogs, curled atop the bedding, added another crucial living layer. Even the ash spread under the bunks absorbed dampness and provided a measure of insulation. The entire household functioned as one giant, complex nesting doll, with each individual piece contributing something vital to the overall thermal puzzle. This principle of layering extended to social life too. You notice how conversations at night naturally soften as people drift into overlapping, intimate clusters. Elders murmur stories at one end of the platform. Children giggle quietly under their hides at the other. Couples whisper in low tones somewhere in between. These voices themselves form another kind of insulation, a sound layer, wrapping the longhouse in a blanket of intimacy. Against the profound silence of the snow-covered world outside, the constant, low hum of noise inside becomes its own protective skin. Scholars debate whether these intricate layering strategies were innovations developed gradually over time or long-standing traditions carried faithfully from ancestral homelands. Some argue they were specific responses to the particular, harsh climate of the northeast woodlands, refined with each passing generation. Others suggest the methods trace back centuries earlier, long before bark longhouses, perhaps to earlier forms of communal living. Without precise archaeological evidence, the question remains open, but the sheer continuity of the practice speaks for itself. As a quirky aside, modern reenactors who have tried sleeping in reconstructed longhouses often describe waking up drenched in sweat, despite freezing temperatures just outside the walls. They joke that the hardest part isn't keeping warm, but escaping overheating once you are thoroughly swaddled in too many layers. It serves as a potent reminder that survival here wasn't about achieving perfect comfort or balance. It was about ensuring that freezing to death was never an option, even if it meant sometimes sweating uncomfortably under the heavy furs. As you adjust your own hides, pulling them tighter, you realize that layering isn't just a survival technique, it's a powerful metaphor. Each layer represents another piece of the community's collective effort. Hunters bringing in the hides, women weaving the mats, children stuffing the reeds into seams, traders exchanging precious cloth. Warmth here is fundamentally communal, stacked together from countless individual contributions, each one as vital as the next. You sink back into the pile, feeling the outer layers stiff and smoky, and the inner ones soft and retaining warmth. Your own body heat is caught securely between them. Outside, snow continues to fall in endless layers upon the forest. Each individual flake is indistinguishable, fragile, but together they form immense mountains. Inside you mirror that very strategy, insulating, accumulating, turning fragility into collective strength. And as your eyes close again, you realize this is the true essence of longhouse survival. Never relying on one single defense, but always layering, always stacking, until the cold, however relentless, is slowed just enough for you to drift peacefully into dreams. The longhouse lies quiet now, except for the soft, steady rhythm of sleepers, and the occasional sharp bark from a dog positioned near the entrance. You think the space must surely be full already, pressed shoulder to shoulder with kin. But then, the heavy door flap stirs noticeably. A raw blast of icy air slices into the warmth, and two figures stoop low, entering quickly and shaking thick snow from their cloaks. Travelers have arrived, late in the night, seeking vital refuge from the storm. Ethnographers who studied these communities agree on one crucial point. Longhouses were not just shelters for immediate family, but also served as community inns of a sort. Guests, traders, messengers, or relatives traveling from other villages could almost always be welcomed inside, no matter how crowded the sleeping bunks already seemed. Hospitality, in this unforgiving climate, was survival. To turn someone away in the dead of midwinter was essentially to condemn them to death, and the powerful ethic of shared warmth extended far beyond one's immediate kin. A vivid little detail confirming this comes from a Dutch trader's notes. He described entering a long house so utterly packed with people that he wondered if there was room left for even a mouse, only to be immediately shown a small space that had been cleared near a fire, a place where he could lay his cloak and rest. The family, he noted, didn't complain. They simply made room because that was what the house and their culture demanded. You can almost see the quiet shuffle of bodies, even now, hides being pulled tighter, elbows tucked in, everyone adjusting slightly to accommodate the newcomers. Of course, scholars actively debate how seamless this hospitality always truly was. Some argue that strict protocols governed the treatment of guests. Certain clans, for instance, had specific obligations to host particular visitors. Others expected clear reciprocity at a later date. Still others believe the practice was more ad hoc, guided primarily by immediate circumstance rather than inflexible rules. Archaeological traces, unfortunately, don't reveal nuances of etiquette, so the question lingers, suspended in the smoky air of speculation. What is clear, though, is that the space itself was elastic. The longhouse expanded, not in its physical walls, but in its generosity. The sensory impact of these new arrivals is immediate and undeniable. The heavy flap falls shut behind them, yet the biting cold they carried in lingers for a moment, making your skin prickle. Their damp cloaks drip melting snow onto the mats, releasing the sharp metallic scent of snow and ice into the smoky air. Their breath steams in great visible clouds as they settle near the fire, and the dogs stir, sniffing suspiciously at the strangers before curling back to sleep. Within mere moments, however, the travellers seem absorbed, their lower voices blending into the soft, constant hum of the established household. Sometimes, guests brought gifts, perhaps some preserved food, useful tools, or, importantly, news of distant kin. These offerings were practical, naturally, but they also served to ease the potential strain of extra mouths to feed. Imagine a small pouch of dried berries being passed around the hearth, or a fresh bundle of firewood being laid down gratefully by the wall. These were tokens, small gestures that transformed what might feel like an intrusion into a welcome contribution. You can picture the quiet gratitude as a family shares a new flavor in their nightly stew, the warmth of both the fire and shared generosity spreading together. A quirky aside surfaces in some oral stories. Children sometimes teased the weary travelers by asking directly whether they snored, joking that space was tight enough already without adding loud sleep to the mix. This humor, however light, likely disguised a very real underlying tension. Every new sleeper meant more crowding, more shared body heat, yes, but also inevitably more noise and less personal space. Still, the teasing itself demonstrates how normalized such visits were. Guests weren't extraordinary occurrences, they were simply expected. But scholars rightly question how welcome those guests always felt beneath the surface. Was there sometimes resentment at losing precious personal space, at having to press even tighter under the hides? Did quarrels occasionally spark over who had to share which specific bunk? Some researchers suggest that longhouses, while fundamentally communal, were also fraught with subtle internal politics, and adding outsiders could potentially tip delicate balances. Others argue forcefully that the powerful ethic of generosity generally overrode such concerns, with social harmony prized above individual complaint. As with so many elements of longhouse life, the truth likely lies somewhere in the complex shades between these absolutes. The soundscape subtly shifts with travelers present. New voices murmur, perhaps in strange dialects. Stories of distant villages ripple through the chamber. Children whisper curious questions about where the newcomers came from. Elders nod solemnly, carefully weighing the news brought from afar. Gossip and vital information ride the same smoky air currents that cook the meals and warm the hands. The long house, in these moments, becomes not just a shelter but also a forum, expanding its reach far beyond its bark walls into a living network of villages and nations. You notice how quickly the initial chill brought in by the guests is erased. Within minutes, their bodies add significantly to the collective furnace. They become more coals added to the human fire. What began as a potential intrusion smoothly turns into a reinforcement of warmth. The irony is clear and profound. The more crowded the house becomes, the warmer it gets. The physical discomfort of having less space is directly traded for the vital comfort of having more heat. A symbolic reading emerges clearly here. The Longhouse is far more than just a building. It is a living lesson in community. To survive the night, you do not hoard your warmth, you share it. You open your flap, even when your own bed is already full. The reward is not just survival for the guest, but ultimately survival for the entire group. Because tomorrow, the roles might easily be reversed, and you might be the one stumbling in from the blinding snow, desperate for shelter. The flap stirs again as the wind tugs at it, and you feel the faintest trace of a draft. But now, with the newcomers tucked securely into place, the air inside feels somehow thicker, warmer, more alive. The Longhouse has accepted them, and in doing so, it has grown stronger. You pull your hides closer around you and begin to drift back towards sleep, comforted by the profound thought that survival here is never solitary. It is a gift, passed constantly back and forth, from traveller to host, night after enduring night. The Longhouse is never truly still, but you realize the busiest moments often arrive just before the dawn. Tonight you stir awake again, not to the storm, but to the muffled thuds of feet on the planks and the soft, deliberate scrape of tools against wood. It isn't feasting time, nor is it storytelling time. This is the sound of quiet, essential labor, the ongoing work of keeping everything inside from slipping irrevocably into ruin. You realize that while most sleep soundly, some are always tending, repairing, adjusting, meticulously maintaining the fragile balance that keeps everyone else alive through the night. Archaeological findings strongly support this picture of constant upkeep. Excavated longhouse sites consistently reveal repeated layers of patchwork, moss stuffed ever deeper into seams, structural poles replaced in obvious haste, hearths rebuilt over and over again. The structure wasn't a frozen, static monument. It was a living thing, continuously nursed back into stability. You feel it now, viscerally, as someone moves slowly along the wall nearby, pushing reeds firmly into a gap where the cold breathes through, their hands rough but undeniably steady. Without such ceaseless work, even one bad night, one failed seam, could break the entire system. Here's a peculiar detail that emerges from oral accounts. Certain crucial tasks were often carried out in the near-total darkness, specifically to avoid letting frigid air flood in through briefly opened flaps. People apparently preferred to patch from within, layering moss or extra hides against the drafts while relying only on the faint, flickering glow of the distant fire. Imagine the immense patience required to work primarily by touch, fingers hunting blindly for cracks while the thick smoke stings your eyes. The house was cared for, diligently, even while most of its residents lay snoring obliviously under their hides. Scholars continue to argue about how much of this upkeep was simple, daily routine versus major seasonal overhaul. Some suggest the deep winter nights were mostly for minor, immediate fixes, with significant repairs delayed until the thaw. Others firmly believe that large-scale adjustments, perhaps even shifting supporting poles, were done midwinter if a catastrophic collapse threatened. Without direct, written records, the answer remains debated, but all agree on one point: vigilance never ceased. Survival absolutely meant treating maintenance not just as a chore, but as a vital ritual. The sensory palette of this pre-dawn activity tells you everything. You hear the faint, high squeak of wood being wedged tightly into place, the soft hiss of snow being shaken off hides brought in from outside, the muffled cough of someone working too close to the drifting smoke. You smell the damp, fresh moss, just recently torn, its deep forest scent intruding sharply into the smoky chamber. You feel the subtle, almost imperceptible shift of the air as cracks are sealed, the thin drafts replaced by a steadier, more encompassing warmth. Each small adjustment actively reshapes the atmosphere of the house, pulling it back, inch by inch, from the potential edge of collapse. Sometimes, this necessary maintenance became communal drama. A quirky aside mentions that when a major leak suddenly appeared, say, a door flap torn completely free in a violent storm, the entire household might rise together in the middle of the night to fix it. Children would hold poles steady. Elders muttered advice gleaned from past crises. Adults worked furiously with knives and sinew lashings. The longhouse would echo with a controlled urgency, every single hand contributing. The memory of such nights, apparently, lingered for years, often retold with rueful laughter once the immediate danger had passed. Remember the night we patched the roof with that broken canoe paddle? Someone might chuckle around future fires, but beneath the eventual humor always lay a bedrock of anxiety. Scholars debate whether the fear of sudden, catastrophic collapse was perhaps exaggerated by outsiders, or if it was a genuinely ever-present threat. Some modern reconstructions suggest longhouses could endure storms with surprising ease. Others show roofs sagging alarmingly under heavy snow loads. The truth, as always, likely varied significantly. Some houses held strong for decades. Others groaned and seemed to demand near-constant nursing just to stay upright. Either way, the nightly routine of checking, patching, and adjusting served as crucial insurance against catastrophe. The symbolic weight of this constant labor is striking. Children grew up watching their elders diligently patching seams, learning implicitly that warmth didn't simply exist. It had to be built and then rebuilt. It was constantly earned. Each crack sealed was a tangible lesson. Survival is maintenance, not a miracle. You roll slightly under your hides and think of how profoundly different this is from your own world, where heating often hums invisibly, taken for granted. Here, warmth has a sound, a smell, a palpable rhythm of labor that never truly stops. You picture a man crouched low by the hearth, carefully raking the ashes so the embers will last until dawn. Another person kneels patiently at the wall, stuffing moss with practiced economical speed. A woman flips damp, heavy hides near the fire, muttering at their stubborn weight. None of this is glamorous. None of it is new. But each small, repeated task keeps the fragile line between warmth and frost from finally collapsing. The longhouse survives because its people refuse to rest fully, because someone always tends. And in that profound realization, you feel a deeper, more abiding comfort settle over you. Warmth here isn't luck. It is intention. It is persistence. It is the cumulative sum of countless small, essential acts performed diligently in smoke and near darkness. You curl tighter into your bedding, listening to the quiet sounds of repairs continuing around you, and you finally let yourself relax completely. The house groans. The storm whispers outside, but the people inside work on. And because they work, you can sleep. The faint, grey glow of morning never truly penetrates the deep interior of the longhouse, but you can absolutely sense the shift. The embers are being stirred back to life, the smoke holes are widened slightly, and the air, though still heavy with the night's accumulation, grows perceptibly more breathable. People are moving now, but with a different purpose. They are not moving to repair, or simply to huddle closer for warmth. They are moving to prepare for the day ahead. You understand that the secret of survival here lies not just in enduring the long night. It is in consciously building the habits that make the next day possible. This is one point upon which nearly every historian agrees. Longhouse communities lived by a powerful, ingrained rhythm. The tending of the fire, the careful storage of food, the rotation of bedding, the drying of hides, the constant stuffing of moss into seams, these were not random, haphazard acts. They were schedules, deeply ingrained rituals practiced so consistently that the routines themselves became as reliable and as essential as the bark walls. You feel it in the way bodies seem to rise without needing to be called. You see it in the way the necessary tools appear at just the right moment, in the way no one seems to argue about what must come next. A curious detail emerges from certain oral accounts. Families sometimes assigned each person a particular, rotating night watch role. One child might be responsible for fetching small sticks to gently revive the fire. A teenager might be tasked with checking for new leaks along their section of the wall. An elder might deliberately sit awake longer than the others, listening intently for drafts or the sounds of intruders. These roles, it said, were passed down like precious heirlooms, each child growing naturally into their responsibility as fundamental as learning to walk. Imagine the quiet pride of being told, "Tonight, you guard the embers, the warmth, the very survival of the entire family rested quite literally in your small hands. Scholars, predictably, debate how much of this structure was rigid and how much was flexible. Some argue that clans had strict, unwavering expectations about who performed precisely what tasks. Others suggest the system was far more fluid, with everyone simply pitching in wherever they were needed most at that moment. The existing excavations and historical records provide little definitive clarity, leaving only the strong impression of households that somehow managed to balance necessary discipline with crucial adaptation. You realize that survival wasn't about rigid, unyielding rules, nor was it about chaos. It was about achieving harmony, an ongoing, dynamic negotiation between structure and spontaneity. The sensory texture of these morning routines is vivid and immediate. You hear the rhythmic scraping of wooden ladles as the breakfast stews are stirred, their rising steam softening the stale chill in the air. You smell the pungent aroma of damp hides being hung closer to the fire, slowly sweetening as the smoke begins to dry them. You feel the occasional bump of bodies weaving around you in the semi-darkness, each movement purposeful, practiced, efficient. Even in this dim light, the space pulses with coordinated activity, much like a hive, with each member fulfilling their specific part. And here's a quirky aside. Some accounts note that mornings in the Longhouse were often filled with joking competitions about who had slept the worst. People would tease one another relentlessly about snoring, about shoving elbows during the night, about hogging all the good furs. These complaints, though rooted in real frustrations of the cramped quarters, were kept playful. They served to diffuse tension. Laughter itself became another essential ritual, a way of collectively shrugging off the inevitable discomfort and turning it into a shared story. "You nearly pushed me onto the floor last night," someone might joke, while simultaneously handing that very same cousin a ladle brimming with steaming broth. But these survival routines were not all cheerful. They also carried immense weight. The firewood inventories had to be meticulously checked. Water needed to be brought in before the ice sealed the streams completely. More moss had to be gathered in anticipation of future drafts. Neglect wasn't just laziness, it was immediate danger. Scholars differ on whether these essential chores were driven more by communal discipline or by sheer, unavoidable necessity. Either way, no one could simply opt out for long. The house itself remembered neglect. It remembered in the form of new drafts, in gnawing hunger, in colder nights to come. The symbolism of this daily cycle is powerful. The Longhouse wasn't merely a passive shelter, it was an active machine, powered entirely by cooperation. The fires didn't burn without the woodcutters. The stews didn't steam without the gatherers. The hides didn't dry without careful, constant tending. Warmth itself was a communal invention, renewed fresh every single day by dozens of hands working in concert. You realize, listening to the quiet bustle all around you, that comfort here was never, ever taken for granted. It was manufactured, piece by piece, habit by habit. A specific sensory moment lingers as you sip warm broth from a bowl past your way. It tastes smoky, earthy, with a faint sweetness lingering from dried squash. The warmth spreads comfortingly through your chest, and suddenly, all the labor of the morning makes perfect, undeniable sense. Each habit, each seemingly small task, is fuel. It is fuel for the body, it is fuel for the fire, and it is fuel for the collective will required to face another frozen day. You glance around at the faces lit softly by the growing firelight, and you realize the house itself teaches discipline. The cold punishes forgetfulness, instantly, brutally. Skip a chore, and the frost creeps in. Fail to stoke the fire properly, and the air inevitably chills. Neglect the moss stuffing, and new drafts bite sharp through the hides. The environment is utterly unforgiving, but because of that harshness, the people become meticulous. The Longhouse isn't just a shelter. It is a stern teacher, one that demands constant attentiveness and rewards unwavering diligence with the ultimate prize, survival. As you pull your own hide tighter around your shoulders, you feel the warmth of the food inside you, the comforting weight of established routine, and the deep, unspoken trust in those around you. The night may have been long and arduous, but the day has been prepared for. And tonight, when the storm inevitably returns, The household will meet it again, not with panic, but with rhythm, with labor, with rituals repeated so often they feel like second nature, as involuntary and essential as breathing. You close your eyes briefly, listening to the scrape of ladles, the crackle of logs, the steady murmur of voices, and you realize the most enduring insulation of all isn't moss, or hide, or even carefully banked ash. It is habit. The relentless, steady choreography of people who never stop tending to one another and to the fragile walls that keep death at bay. You feel the very air shift as morning fully asserts itself outside the bark walls. The Longhouse is emphatically not a place where people sleep late. The ingrained rhythm of survival itself pulls everyone upright. Fires now roar again, casting brighter, bolder shadows. Dogs shake themselves awake, scattering dust and stray fur. And already, the talk turns towards what must be done beyond these smoky walls. Winter nights are endured inside, huddled together, but the precious daylight hours demand venturing back outside, into the sharp, blindingly white world. This is one fundamental point upon which archaeologists and historians alike agree. Long house life required a constant, delicate balance between indoor endurance and necessary outdoor labor. No matter how well the fire burned, no matter how thick the piled hides, families had to leave the relative safety of the cocoon. Hunting was essential. Water needed hauling. More wood always needed splitting. Reeds or medicinal herbs might need gathering, even in the deep snow. Even in the heart of midwinter, these vital tasks continued, relentlessly. You can easily imagine the collective shiver that runs through the house when someone finally pulls back the heavy door flap and a brutal blast of snow-scented air invades the carefully husbanded warmth. A curious little note comes from missionary journals. They remarked with astonishment at how quickly the native men and women seemed to adjust between these profound extremes. One moment, they were pressed shoulder to shoulder under thick furs. The very next, they were trudging determinedly through waste, deep snow, axes or sleds firmly in hand. Children, too, learned this essential rhythm from their earliest years, perhaps chasing dogs out into the white glare, only to return minutes later, red-cheeked and steaming, immediately greeted by scolding elders, holding hides at the ready, prepared to bundle them up again. Life here was a constant pendulum, swinging ceaselessly between firelit survival and frostbitten labor. Scholars still actively dispute just how much time was actually spent outdoors during the very coldest months. Some argue that families planned so meticulously, stockpiled so effectively, that the deep winters were largely spent inside, with people emerging only when absolutely necessary. Others firmly believe that daily excursions were simply unavoidable, as crucial stores inevitably dwindled and the structure itself demanded constant attention and repair. Both views likely hold some weight, but the deeper truth may lie somewhere in between. The Longhouse was a refuge, yes, but it was never intended as a prison. Survival here meant maintaining a constant, active dialogue with the outside world. The sensory contrast experienced during this transition is jarring, almost violent. Step outside, and the frigid air slashes at your lungs, feeling crisp and sharply metallic. The sheer brightness of the snow nearly blinds you, and it crunches underfoot with a high-pitched squeak that echoes strangely through the silent forest. Then, step back inside, and the thick smoke instantly hugs you, the warmth pressing close, almost too close, your eyes watering from the sudden, dramatic shift in light and atmosphere. To live here is to toggle constantly between two distinct climates, each harsh and demanding in its own unique way. And here is another quirky aside. Some accounts describe families deliberately cooling themselves outdoors for a few moments, before crawling back under the warm furs, believing the physiological shock actually made the indoor warmth feel even sweeter, more profound. Children, naturally, laughed their way through it, treating the quick dash out into the snow as a dare, tumbling back inside, shrieking with delight as the dogs shook frost all over them. Outsiders might have thought it madness. Those who lived it knew it was crucial for morale. But these outdoor ventures were deadly serious. Hunting in winter required not just exceptional skill, but also incredible endurance. Men tracked deer across the vast snowscape, sometimes for days on end, returning utterly exhausted but triumphant, bearing meat that meant continued life for dozens of people back in the Longhouse. Women, equally vital, cut firewood and hauled heavy baskets of reeds or supplies, their breath misting visibly in the frigid air. Children were tasked with fetching water through holes laboriously cut in the frozen rivers, their small hands chapped raw but held steady. Each return to the warmth and smoke of the Longhouse was far more than mere relief. It was a small victory, tangible proof that the essential bond between the human community and the land held firm, even against winter's worst. Scholars continue to debate whether these necessary daily outings ultimately weakened or strengthened the community's survival odds. Some argue the immense energy spent laboring outdoors was dangerous, potentially burning more calories than the gathered food could possibly provide. Others counter forcefully that without the constant foraging and wood gathering, the house would inevitably have frozen solid or starved before spring arrived. Archaeological evidence, such as middens filled with winter hunting remains, strongly suggests that significant activity persisted throughout the cold months, though exactly how much remains unsettled. Inside, you feel the echoes of those vital excursions. When someone returns, the atmosphere within the Longhouse changes perceptibly. Snow-streaked hides are hung near the fire, steaming and dripping onto the packed earth floor. Dogs leap joyfully, shaking fine ice powder onto the sleeping mats. The raw, metallic smell of fresh meat sometimes mingles with the smoke, promising a richer stew to come. Children cluster around the returning figures, eager for stories of what was seen outside. Fresh deer trails, distant wolf howls, perhaps trees broken and heavy with newly fallen snow. The Longhouse, for all its careful insulation, never truly forgets the wilderness just beyond its walls. It enters with every returning step. Symbolically, this constant back and forth is vital. The Longhouse itself teaches that survival isn't about hiding from the world, but about engaging with it, strategically, then retreating wisely. The bark walls are not impenetrable boundaries, but living membranes, porous and alive. Cold rushes in, warmth rushes out, and the families within learn to move with that flow, rather than futilely fighting against it. The sensory rhythm of this exchange eventually soothes you. The high-pitched squeal of snow underfoot outside fades into the familiar crackle of the fire within. The sharp smell of pine sap, carried in on heavy cloaks, slowly dissolves into the deep, comforting musk of aged hides. Your skin tingles from the sudden drafts near the door flap, then relaxes again as the encompassing warmth reclaims you. Each oscillation serves as a reminder that comfort is fleeting, but renewal is constant. As you burrow back into your bedding, you think again about this pendulum life. Warmth, you realize, is not a permanent state here. It is a reward, earned anew each time someone bravely steps out into the snow and successfully returns. The Longhouse is not a fortress, sealed against the elements. It is more like a dock, tethering its people securely to the vast stormy ocean beyond. And you, feeling snug once more under your layered cocoon, feel a deep gratitude knowing that when the flap opens again tomorrow, someone else will step out into that blinding white glare, ensuring that the precious warmth inside can continue for at least one night longer. You awaken slowly, not to the sharp sounds of urgent repairs or the frantic roar of a storm, but to the low, steady hum of conversation. It's rhythmic, almost soothing. It takes a moment for your sleep-fogged mind to realize what you are hearing. People are talking, yes, but not about firewood, or hunting prospects, or patching the seams. They are talking about memory. You understand then that the long winter nights inside the Longhouse were never filled only with essential chores and necessary sleep. They were also the dedicated seasons of storytelling, the crucial time for passing knowledge directly from mouth to mouth, ear to ear. Warmth, it seems, came not just from the flickering flames, but from the words themselves, words that bound the generations tightly together. Observers often noted this profound practice, sometimes with awe. In the long, dark months when deep snow effectively shut down the world outside, families inevitably turned inward, weaving their vital tales by the firelight. Elders recounted the sacred origin myths, the detailed histories of the clans, the hard-learned lessons from past winters. Each meticulous retelling wasn't merely entertainment, it was a form of cultural insurance. Knowledge, deeply embedded within the story, carried essential survival strategies: which specific herbs eased a fever, where to reliably find deer when the snow lay deepest, how to read the stars when familiar paths vanished beneath the drifts. You listen now and hear how this crucial wisdom slips seamlessly into the narrative, cleverly disguised as adventure or song or fable. And here is a curious little detail. Some nations considered winter the only proper season for telling certain sacred stories. To recount them in the summer, when the fields demanded constant labor, was considered disrespectful, perhaps even dangerous. But here, in the smoky stillness of the Longhouse, with the entire outside world frozen and quiet, the stories could flow freely, unhurried, given the reverence they deserved. Imagine the children, waiting patiently all year for these specific tales, their eyes wide and reflecting the flicker of the flames, their small bodies pressed tightly under the hides, while their minds soared far away into myth. Scholars still debate just how much of this storytelling was strictly ritual versus simply casual interaction. Some argue the winter nights were highly structured, with elders formally holding the floor while others listened in respectful silence. Others believe the atmosphere was far more fluid, with stories mingling freely with laughter, gentle teasing, and spontaneous songs. The archaeological evidence, sadly, cannot answer this question, leaving only the often biased written impressions of outsiders, many of whom likely misunderstood the nuances of what they witnessed. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Ritual and play, deeply interwoven like the bark and moss forming the walls around you. The sensory landscape of these storytelling moments is unforgettable. The fire crackles and pops, punctuating the steady cadence of a well-known tale. The smoke shifts with each subtle draft, momentarily veiling faces until they look half human, half spirit. A child gasps aloud at a surprising twist in the narrative, the sound cutting sharply through the stillness, followed immediately by a soft ripple of knowing chuckles from the adults. You smell the sharp fragrance of sage, tossed onto the fire perhaps for emphasis, cutting cleanly through the heavy musk of the hides. Every single sense confirms that story is not just heard here, it is lived. A quirky aside appears in certain oral accounts. Children sometimes acted out parts of the stories with exaggerated gestures, earning waves of laughter when they inevitably stumbled into the mats or knocked over nearby baskets. Elders apparently encouraged this, actively turning the act of learning into a form of play. You can almost see a young boy leaping dramatically to mimic a hunter, his arms flailing wildly before he collapses in helpless giggles onto his cousin. What might seem like simple chaos to an outsider was, in fact, a form of cultural rehearsal, a practice in embodying history so that it would be carried forward, physically and emotionally. The debates among scholars extend even further. Was this storytelling primarily entertainment, designed simply to distract from the cold and boredom, or was it a deeply pragmatic method of teaching essential skills and values? Some reasonably say both, arguing that entertainment itself was a crucial survival tool, lifting spirits during the long, dark months when despair could creep in as insidiously as the frost. Others insist that the vital lessons encoded within the stories about the land, the animals, the ancestors, were the true underlying purpose. Listening to the voices murmuring around you now, you realize these modern categories likely don't matter. What truly matters is how the words themselves warm, how they knit the community tighter than any lacing on a hide. You lean back against a sturdy post, your eyes half closed, letting the gentle murmur wash over you. The rhythm of the voices rises and falls like waves on a shore, carrying you slowly towards drowsiness. For a fleeting moment, you feel as though the stories themselves are blankets, layered thickly around you, trapping heat, keeping the cold firmly at bay. Perhaps that was always their hidden power, not just to teach or entertain, but simply to soothe, to calm the restless body into peaceful rest, despite the drafts, the fleas, and the distant storms. The symbolic weight of it all becomes clear. Fire provided the physical heat. Hides provided the necessary insulation. But the stories provided purpose. Without them, the Longhouse, despite its warmth, would feel like a smoky prison. With them, it became a vibrant theatre of endurance, a place where imagination could carry people far beyond their frozen, confining walls. Survival, you understand, is never solely physical. It is emotional, spiritual, and cultural. Storytelling kept the hearts alive so the bodies would keep fighting. As the final tale winds down, a profound hush settles over the long house, broken only by the soft crackle of the embers. Children yawn deeply, dogs sigh contentedly. The elders lean back, their familiar silhouettes softened and blurred by the lingering smoke. You close your eyes, feeling warmed not only by the hides and the fire, but by the resonance of the voices still echoing softly in your ears. The storm outside may still claw intermittently at the bark, but inside, these words have built a second long house, one invisible, made entirely of memory and meaning, yet just as strong, just as vital, as the physical structure of poles and bark. You begin to drift into sleep with that comforting thought, realizing that warmth is more than just a physical condition. It is a story, one that you carry forward, layer by intricate layer, until even the longest, hardest winter finally bends beneath its weight. The long house has quieted again, though the deep glow of the embers still paints the curved walls in a faint, pulsing orange haze. You stir beneath your layers of hide, and you notice the way the bodies around you seem to press even closer now than before. The house feels fuller, somehow, not with newly arrived guests this time, but with a deliberate, instinctive act of clustering. Winter nights, especially during the hardest, coldest stretch of what might be February, were not endured in loose, scattered groupings. They were survived by drawing the entire household into tighter, more consolidated knots, sleeping almost as a single, large, living body. Anthropologists often highlight this crucial practice of heat clustering. Families didn't just share bunks loosely. They overlapped, rotated positions, and bundled together with conscious intent, maximizing skin-to-skin warmth whenever possible. Infants were nestled deeply between their parents. Elders leaned heavily against grown children. Cousins crowded together, shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip. It was a nightly, shifting equation of survival, recalculated constantly with each small shift and muffled cough. As you lie here now, your ribs pressed firmly into a neighbor's back, it feels less like an inconvenience and much more like a fundamental necessity. A curious detail appears in some oral recollections. People apparently joked that the long house transformed into a giant sleeping snake at night. Bodies coiled together in long rows, curling and unwinding subtly as drafts forced constant minor adjustments. Children reportedly laughed at the metaphor, wriggling under the hides, as though they truly were part of a giant, dormant serpent, shedding and reshaping itself in the dark. What might seem claustrophobic became, through the application of humor, a shared, collective identity. The longhouse wasn't just dozens of individuals sleeping separately. It was one single organism, warming itself against the encroaching snow. Scholars, however, still disagree on how truly comfortable this intense clustering really was. Some suggest the accumulated warmth could become almost unbearable at times, leading to sweaty, restless nights. Others argue that the persistent drafts and dampness often made even the tight press of bodies barely sufficient, with sleep always remaining shallow and half-broken. Modern reenactors who have attempted the practice report experiencing both extremes, one night sweltering, the next shivering uncontrollably. The truth likely shifted as unpredictably as the weather raging just outside the walls. The immediate sensory dimension is intense. You feel the distinct weight of another person's arm draped across your chest, the damp heat of someone's breath against the back of your neck, the sharp edge of a knee pressing firmly into your hip. Every small sound is amplified by this closeness. The wet wheeze from an elder's lungs, the soft whimper accompanying a child's dream, the low grunt of a dog shifting its position at your feet. Privacy utterly dissolves into shared warmth, and you consciously surrender to the overriding idea that survival simply matters more than solitude. There exists an even quirkier aside, one that outsiders often recorded with considerable surprise. Some households apparently even slept with chickens or other small animals tucked right under the hides with them, not as pets, but purely as living, breathing heaters. The birds would quiet down in the dark, their small measure of warmth bleeding into the larger pile of bodies. It might seem absurd to modern ears, accustomed to down comforters, But in a world without such luxuries, every feathered ounce of warmth counted. You can almost feel a small hen shifting beside your ankle now, its soft cluck reminding you that warmth was always a collective project, where even species boundaries blurred in the face of the cold. This nightly crowding wasn't just physical, it carried significant social weight. Who slept beside whom revealed complex layers of kinship, social ties, trust, and sometimes even subtle political alliances within the clan. Being pulled into the protected center of the group meant both safety and esteem. Being left on the drafty outer edge could sting with more than just the cold. Scholars debate whether this arrangement shifted nightly with circumstance or remained relatively fixed based on status, but all agree it clearly reflected the social fabric just as much as the thermal necessity. To be wrapped securely in the middle was both physical comfort and social recognition. Yet conflict, inevitably, sometimes surfaced. Someone snored too loudly. Someone else hogged the thickest hide. Someone repeatedly elbowed a cousin just one too many times. Quarrels were muttered in the darkness, only to dissolve into shared laughter or the demands of morning chores come dawn. The Longhouse tolerated this friction because survival absolutely demanded it. The cold didn't care if you disliked your neighbor. You still desperately needed their warmth. The symbolic lesson of this intense clustering runs deep. It demonstrates how shared vulnerability could reshape traditional hierarchy. The strong protected the weak, certainly, but they also leaned on them for reciprocal comfort and warmth. Infants, who generated very little heat themselves, still anchored families together with their essential presence. Elders, though perhaps frail, provided the steady, reassuring weight of experience and memory. In the dark, pressed so close that all boundaries blurred, everyone became an integral part of the same human quilt. The storm outside groans faintly again, but you hardly notice any more. You are enveloped now in layers of hide, yes, but also in equally important layers of flesh and profound trust. Your body heat is no longer entirely your own. It mingles freely with those around you, rising in a collective humid haze that the external cold cannot easily penetrate. As you close your eyes again, you realize the profound, underlying truth. Survival in the Longhouse wasn't about building individual cocoons of warmth. It was about surrendering to the group, consciously allowing your warmth to merge completely with theirs until the very line between you and the community effectively dissolved. The relentless cold outside could never understand this secret. But inside, pressed together like the living scales of the same great snake, you drift into slumber, alive, precisely because togetherness itself is the ultimate blanket. The Longhouse exhales quietly as the night deepens yet again. Fires have been carefully fed one last time, hides have been adjusted for optimal warmth, and restless children have been soothed back into slumber. You lie enveloped in the familiar haze of warmth and smoke, listening intently to the steady, collective rhythm of sleep all around you. By now, after this immersive journey, you understand implicitly that every single detail, the layered bark walls, the vital moss packed into the seams, the strategic layering of heavy hides, the instinctive clustering of bodies, the endless, necessary tending of the fire, is an integral part of a complex system, one honed meticulously over countless centuries. Still, as the first hints of dawn remain hours away, you feel the need to reflect, to consciously gather these disparate fragments into a single, cohesive picture. Archaeologists and historians fundamentally agree on one undeniable fact. People endured harsh winters within these structures for generations upon generations. That sheer longevity alone proves their profound effectiveness. Longhouses may certainly not have been comfortable by modern, pampered standards, but they unequivocally worked. The layered bark and natural insulation successfully trapped precious heat. The multiple hearths produced both essential warmth and preservative smoke, and the careful, constant daily maintenance kept catastrophic collapse at bay. The ultimate proof lies simply in survival itself. Communities thrived within these walls, raised their children, and passed down their stories through countless brutal winters, somehow managing not to succumb to the deadly cold. And yet, alongside this remarkable success, there are those constant, quirky details that remind you survival was never a neat or tidy affair. Drips of condensation fell persistently, like a slow indoor rain. Fleas and lice turned the bedding into nightly battlefields. Dogs brazenly stole the prime spots closest to the fire. Perhaps even chickens squawked occasionally from beneath the hides. The longhouse, in reality, was often as much a chaotic menagerie as it was a human home. Outsiders, encountering these conditions, sometimes mocked these perceived inconveniences. But those who lived inside understood the deeper truth. Imperfection did not equate to failure. You could itch, you could cough, and you could still live to see the spring thaw. Scholars continue to argue vigorously over just how warm the interiors truly managed to get. Some modern reconstructions suggest the ambient temperatures perhaps hovered only just above freezing enough to prevent outright death, certainly, but never enough to mimic true comfort. Other historical accounts record interiors where the accumulated heat became almost stifling, with smoke so dense that unprepared visitors stumbled out gasping for air. The debate remains unsettled, and perhaps that is fitting. The actual experience likely varied significantly, perhaps nightly, even hourly, depending on the severity of the storm outside, the size and intensity of the fires, and the unwavering discipline of the household members. Warmth here was never a static condition. It was a constantly shifting negotiation with the elements. The overall sensory imprint is unforgettable. The deep creak of bark panels bending under the immense weight of snow, the pervasive scent of cedar and sage smouldering alongside the wood smoke, the rough, familiar feel of deer hide pressed against your cheek, oily and retaining warmth, the collective sound of breath drawn in unison, rising like a communal mist toward the darkened rafters, the mesmerizing sight of bright sparks slipping up through the smoke holes and vanishing into the starry dark above. Even the persistent discomforts, the drip of moisture, the irritating scratch of pests, the inevitable cough from the heavy haze become integral parts of a larger, richer texture. Together, they form the intricate tapestry of endurance. And there is that one quirky aside worth remembering. Some accounts claim people deliberately allowed, even encouraged, snow to pile high against the outer walls, effectively turning the storms themselves into allies. The deep drifts acted as substantial extra insulation, muffling the howling wind and sealing countless tiny cracks. What initially seemed like a profound danger became, through ingenuity, a form of protection. You smile inwardly at the sheer cleverness of it, taking the very thing that threatened to bury you and making it an essential part of your defense. That resourceful spirit of adaptation, of bending hardship into help, truly is the essence of longhouse survival. Symbolically, the longhouse itself stands as a powerful teacher. It reminds you, viscerally, that warmth isn't simply given, it must be actively made. It demands relentless cooperation. Wood must be split, moss gathered, food cooked, stories told, hides shared. It insists, generation after generation, that survival is fundamentally communal, not individual. Alone, no single person could possibly endure the constant drafts and violent storms. But together, pressed body to body, linking generation to generation, people not only survived within these structures, but built complex societies, rich with ceremony, humor, and unwavering resilience. Now, the long night is nearly done. You feel the immense weight of the firs upon you, the palpable heat radiating from the clustered bodies all around, the deep ember glow pulsing steadily from the hearths. Outside, snow still falls silently, but somehow it no longer feels menacing. The house has proven itself once again, holding strong through another demanding winter night. You breathe deeply, feeling a profound gratitude for the collective ingenuity that turned simple bark, moss, smoke, and story into a functioning architecture of survival. And as sleep finally, fully claims you, you carry one last, clear thought. The cold never truly vanished. It pressed hard against the walls all night long, sharp and relentlessly insistent. But it was slowed. It was softened. It was blunted not by one single miracle, but by 1,000 small, deliberate acts woven tightly together. That, more than anything else, is how Native Americans slept soundly in their longhouses without freezing to death. And now, as our shared journey through the smoky rafters and crowded bunks of the longhouse finally comes to its close, It is time to let go of all the intricate details and simply settle into softness. You can easily picture the final embers glowing like sleepy, fading eyes, the very last crackle of wood folding gently into profound silence. The storm outside no longer rattles the walls. It muffles itself in the deep snowdrifts, sounding distant, softened, as if even the winter itself has finally grown tired. Your body feels heavy, deeply relaxed beneath the layered hides. The warmth, so hard-earned through shared fire and breath and closeness, wraps you securely, like a natural cocoon. You no longer need to think about moss seams or dwindling firewood piles. You don't need to count the drips from the roof or scratch absently at the occasional tickle. All of that fades now, receding into the background. What remains is only the steady, quiet rhythm of life itself, breath rising and falling in unison, hearts beating quietly in the darkness, the community holding itself together, steadfast against the lingering night. Let your mind drift gently up to the rafters, where the tools and food hang in absolute stillness, preserved and protected by the smoke. Imagine, perhaps, the soft rustle of feathers from a small bird tucked safely beneath someone's hides nearby, or the gentle sigh of a dog shifting closer to your feet for warmth. Every sound now is muted, softened by the passage of time, wrapped in a comforting haze. Even the air itself feels gentle now. The smoke that once stung your eyes has thinned to a pale, translucent veil, a gauze that filters the faint firelight into a dreamlike glow. It blurs the edges of everything until the longhouse itself seems almost to float less a solid structure of bark and pole, more like a cradle, suspended peacefully between the frozen earth and the distant sky. So breathe slowly now, deeply, and simply let the story dissolve entirely into warmth. Outside, the winter waits. But inside, you are safe, wrapped securely in countless layers of ingenuity and enduring care. Close your eyes. Rest easy. The long night has been endured.